Chapter 11. As I drove south on the mile-a-minute highway, I tried to convince myself that I needn't bother with Carolyn Poulin. I told myself she was Al Templeton's experiment, not mine, and his experiment, like his life, was now over. I reminded myself that the Poulin girl's case was very different from that of Doris, Troy, Tugga, and Ellen. Yes, Carolyn was going to be paralyzed from the waist down, and yes, that was a terrible thing. But being paralyzed by a bullet is not the same as being beaten to death with a sledgehammer. In a wheelchair or out of it, Carolyn Poulin was going to live a full and fruitful life. I told myself it would be crazy to risk my real mission by yet again daring the obdurate past to reach out, grab me, and chew me up. None of it would wash. I had meant to spend my first night on the road in Boston, but the image of Dunning on his father's grave with the crushed basket of flowers beneath him kept recurring. He had deserved to die. Hell, needed to. But on October 5th, he had, as yet, done nothing to his family. Not to his second one, anyway. I could tell myself, and did, that he'd done plenty to his first one. That on October 13th of 1958, he was already a murderer twice over, one of his victims little more than an infant. But I had only Bill Turcott's word for that. I guess in the end I wanted to balance something that felt bad, no matter how necessary, with something that felt good. So instead of driving to Boston, I got off the turnpike at Auburn and drove west into Maine's Lakes region. I checked into the cabins where Al had stayed just before nightfall. I got the largest of the 4 waterside accommodations at a ridiculous off-season rate. Those 5 weeks may have been the best of my life. I saw no one but the couple who ran the local store where I bought a few simple groceries twice a week, and Mr. Winchell, who owned the cabins. He stopped in on Sundays to make sure I was okay and having a good time. Every time he asked, I told him I was, and it was no lie. He gave me a key to the equipment shed, and I took a canoe out every morning and evening when the water was calm. I remember watching the full moon rise silently over the trees on one of those evenings and how it beat a silver avenue across the water, while the reflection of my canoe hung below me like a drowned twin. A loon cried somewhere and was answered by a pal or a mate. Soon others joined the conversation. I shipped my paddle and just sat there 300 yards out from shore, watching the moon and listening to the loons converse. I remember thinking if there was a heaven somewhere, and it wasn't like this, then I didn't want to go. The fall colors began to bloom, first timid yellow, then orange, then blazing strumpet red, as autumn burned away another Maine summer. There were cardboard boxes filled with coverless paperbacks at the market, and I must have read 3 dozen or more. Mysteries by Ed McBain, John D. MacDonald, Chester Himes, and Richard S. Prather. Steamy melodramas like Peyton Place and A Stone for Danny Fisher. Westerns by the score, and one science fiction novel called The Lincoln Hunters, which concerned time travelers trying to record a forgotten speech by Abraham Lincoln. When I wasn't reading or canoeing, I was walking in the woods. Long autumn afternoons, most, hazy and warm. Dusty gilded light slanting down through the trees. At night, a quiet so vast it seemed almost to reverberate. Few cars passed on Route 114, and after 10 o'clock or so, there were none at all. After 10, the part of the world where I had come to rest belonged only to the loons and the wind in the fir trees. Little by little, the image of Frank Dunning lying on his father's grave began to fade, and I found myself less likely to recall at odd moments how I had dropped the souvenir pillow still smoldering over his staring eyes in the Tracker mausoleum. By the end of October, as the last of the leaves were swirling down from the trees and the nighttime temperatures began to dip into the 30s, I started driving into Durham, getting the lay of the land around Bowie Hill, where a shooting was going to occur in another 2 weeks. The Friends meeting house Al had mentioned made a convenient landmark. Not far past it, a dead tree was leaning toward the road, probably the one Al had been struggling with when Andrew Cullum came along, already wearing his orange hunting vest. I also made it a point to locate the accidental shooter's home and to trace his probable course from there to Bowie Hill. My plan was no plan at all, really. I'd just follow the trail Al had already blazed. I'd drive to Durham early in the day, park near the fallen tree, struggle with it, then pretend to have a heart attack when Cullum came along and pitched in. But after locating Cullum's house, I happened to stop for a cold drink at Brownie's store, half a mile away, and saw a poster in the window that gave me an idea. It was crazy, but sort of interesting. The poster was headed Androscoggin County Cribbage Tournament Results. There followed a list of about 50 names. The tourney winner from West Minot had scored 10,000 pegs, whatever they were. The runner-up had scored 9,500. In third place, with 8,722 pegs, the name had been circled in red, which was what drew my attention in the first place, was Andy Cullum. Coincidences happen, but I've come to believe they're actually quite rare. Something is at work, okay? Somewhere in the universe or behind it, a great machine is ticking and turning its fabulous gears. The next day, I drove back to Cullum's house just shy of 5 p.m. I parked behind his Ford Woody station wagon and went to the door. A pleasant-faced woman wearing a ruffled apron and holding a baby in the crook of her arm opened to my knock, and I knew, just looking at her, that I was doing the right thing. Because Carolyn Poulin wasn't going to be the only victim on the 15th of November, just the one who'd end up in a wheelchair. Yes? My name's George Amberson, ma'am. I tipped my hat to her. I wonder if I could speak to your husband? Sure I could. He'd already come up behind her and put an arm around her shoulders. A young guy, not yet 30, now wearing an expression of pleasant inquiry. His baby reached for his face, and when Cullum kissed the kid's fingers, she laughed. Cullum extended his hand to me, and I shook it. What can I do for you, Mr. Amberson? I held up the cribbage board. I noticed at Brownie's that you're quite the player, so I have a proposal for you. Mrs. Cullum looked alarmed. My husband and I are Methodists, Mr. Amberson. The tournaments are just for fun. He won a trophy, and I'm happy to polish it for him so it looks good on the mantel. But if you want to play cards for money, you've come to the wrong household. She smiled. I could see it cost her an effort, but it was still a good one. I liked her. I liked both of them. She's right, Cullum sounded regretful but firm. I used to play penny a peg back when I was working at the woods, but that was before I met Marnie. Oh, I'd be crazy to play you for money, I said, because I don't play at all. But I want to learn. In that case, come on in, he said. I'll be happy to teach you. Won't take but 15 minutes, and it's an hour yet before we eat our dinner. Shoot a pickle! If you can add to 15 and count to 31, you can play cribbage. I'm sure there's more to it than a little counting and adding, or you wouldn't have placed third in the Androscoggin tournament, I said. And I actually want a little more than just to learn the rules. I want to buy a day of your time. November the 15th, to be exact. From 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, let's say. Now his wife began to look scared. She was holding the baby close to her chest. For those 6 hours of your time, I'll pay you $200. Cullum frowned. What's your game, mister? I'm hoping to make it cribbage. That, however, wasn't going to be enough. I saw it on their faces. Look, I'm not going to try and kid you that there isn't more to it, but if I tried to explain, you'd think I was crazy. I think that already, Marnie Cullum said. Send him on his way, Andy. I turned to her. It's nothing bad. It's nothing illegal. It's not a scam, and it's not dangerous. I take my oath on it. But I was starting to think it wasn't going to work, oath or no oath. It had been a bad idea. Cullum would be doubly suspicious when he met me near the Friends Meeting House on the afternoon of the 15th. But I kept pushing. It was a thing I'd learned to do in Derry. It's just cribbage, I said. You teach me the game, we play for a few hours, I give you $200 and we all part friends. What do you say? Where are you from, Mr. Amberson? Upstate in Derry, most recently. I'm in commercial real estate. Right now I'm vacationing on Sebago Lake before heading back down south. Do you want some names? References, so to speak? I smiled. People who'll tell you I'm not nuts. He goes out in the woods on Saturdays during hunting season, Mrs. Cullum said. It's the only chance he gets because he works all week, and when he gets home it's so close to dark it doesn't even pay to load a gun. She still looked mistrustful, but now I saw something else on her face that gave me hope. When you're young and have a kid, when your husband works manual labor, which his chapped, calloused hands said he did, $200 can mean a lot of groceries. Or, in 1958, 2.5 house payments. I could miss an afternoon in the woods, Cullum said. Town's pretty well hunted out anyway. The only place left where you can get a damn deer is Bowie Hill. Watch your language around the baby, Mr. Cullum, she said. Her tone was sharp, but she smiled when he kissed her cheek. Mr. Amberson, I need to talk to my wife, Cullum said. Do you mind standing on the stoop for a minute or two? I'll do better than that, I said. I'll go down to Brownie's and get myself a dope. That was what most Darryites called sodas. Can I bring either of you back a cold drink? They declined with thanks, and then Marnie Cullum closed the door in my face. I drove to Brownie's, where I bought an orange crush for myself and a licorice whip I thought the baby might like, if she was old enough to have such things. The Cullums were going to turn me down, I thought, with thanks, but firmly. I was a strange man with a strange proposal. I had hoped that changing the past might be easier this time because Al had already changed it twice. Apparently that wasn't going to be the case. But I got a surprise. Cullum said yes, and his wife allowed me to give the licorice to the little girl, who received it with a gleeful chortle, sucked on it, then ran it through her hair like a comb. They even invited me to stay for the evening meal, which I declined. I offered Andy Cullum a $50 retainer, which he declined, until his wife insisted that he take it. I went back to Sebago feeling exultant, but as I drove back to Durham on the morning of November 15th, the fields white with a frost so thick that the orange-clad hunters who were already out in force left tracks, my mood had changed. He will have called the state police, or the local constable, I thought, and while they're questioning me in the nearest police station, trying to find out what kind of a loony I am, Cullum will be off hunting in the Bowie Hill woods. But there was no police car in the driveway, just Andy Cullum's Ford Woody. I took my new cribbage board and went to the door. He opened it and said, "Ready for your lesson, Mr. Amberson?" I smiled. "Yes, sir, I am." He took me out to the back porch. I don't think the missus wanted me in the house with her and the baby. The rules were simple. Pegs were points, and a game was 2 laps around the board. I learned about the right jack, double runs, being stuck in the mud hole, and what Andy called Mystic 19, the so-called impossible hand. Then we played. I kept track of the score to begin with, but quit once Cullum pulled 400 points ahead. Every now and then some hunter would bang off a distant round, and Cullum would look toward the woods beyond his small backyard. "Next Saturday," I said on one of these occasions, You'll be out there next Saturday for sure." "It'll probably rain," he said, then laughed. "I should complain, huh? I'm having fun and making money. And you're getting better, George." Marnie gave us lunch at noon, big tuna sandwiches and bowls of homemade tomato soup. We ate in the kitchen, and when we were done, she suggested we bring our game inside. She had decided I wasn't dangerous after all. That made me happy. They were nice people, the Cullums. A nice couple, with a nice baby. I thought of them sometimes when I heard Lee and Marina Oswald screaming at each other in their low-end apartments, or saw them, on at least one occasion, carry their animus out onto the street. The past harmonizes, it also tries to balance, and mostly succeeds. The Cullums were at one end of the seesaw. The Oswalds were at the other. And Jake Epping, also known as George Amberson, he was the tipping point. Toward the end of our marathon session, I won my first game. 3 games later, at just a few minutes past 4, I actually skunked him and laughed with delight. Baby Jenna laughed right along with me, then leaned forward from her high chair and gave my hair a companionable tug. "That's it!" I cried, laughing. The 3 Cullums were laughing right along with me. "That's the one I stop on." I took out my wallet and laid 350s down on the red and white checked oilcloth covering the kitchen table. "And worth every cent." Andy pushed it back to my side. "Put it in your billfold where it belongs, George. I had too much fun to take your money." I nodded as if I agreed, then pushed the bills to Marnie, who snatched them up. "Thank you, Mr. Amberson." She looked reproachfully at her husband, then back at me. "We can really use this." "Good." I got up and stretched, hearing my spine crackle. Somewhere 5 miles from here, maybe 7, Carolyn Poulin and her father were getting back into a pick-em-up with Poulin Construction and Carpentry painted on the door. Maybe they'd gotten a deer, maybe not. Either way, I was sure they'd had a nice afternoon in the woods, talking about whatever fathers and daughters talk about, and good for them. "Stay for supper, George," Marnie said. "I've got beans and hot dogs." So I stayed, and afterward we watched the news on the Cullums' little table model TV. There had been a hunting accident in New Hampshire, but not in Maine. I allowed myself to be talked into a second dish of Marnie's apple cobbler, although I was full to bursting, then stood and thanked them very much for their hospitality. Andy Cullum put out his hand. "Next time we play for free, all right?" "You bet." There was going to be no next time, and I think he knew that. His wife did too, it turned out. She caught up to me just before I got into my car. She had swaddled a blanket around the baby and put a little hat on her head. But Marnie had no coat on herself. I could see her breath, and she was shivering. "Mrs. Cullum, you should go in before you catch your death of—" "What did you save him from?" "I beg pardon?" "I know that's why you came. I prayed on it while you and Andy were out there on the porch. God sent me an answer, but not the whole answer. What did you save him from?" I put my hands on her shivering shoulders and looked into her eyes. "Marnie, if God had wanted you to know that part, he would have told you." Abruptly, she put her arms around me and hugged me. Surprised, I hugged her back. Baby Jenna, caught in between, goggled up at us. "Whatever it was, thank you," Marnie whispered in my ear. Her warm breath gave me goosebumps. "Go inside, hon, before you freeze." The front door opened. Andy was standing there holding a can of beer. "Marnie? Mon?" She stepped back. Her eyes were wide and dark. "God brought us a guardian angel," she said. "I won't speak of this, but I'll hold it and ponder it in my heart." Then she hurried up the walk to where her husband was waiting. Angel. It was the second time I'd heard that, and I pondered the word in my own heart, both that night while I lay in my cabin waiting for sleep and the next day as I drifted my canoe across still Sunday waters under a cold blue tilting to winter sky. Guardian angel. On Monday, the 17th of November, I saw the first whirling flurries of snow and took them as a sign. I packed up, drove down to Sebago Village, and found Mr. Winchell drinking coffee and eating donuts at the lakeside restaurant. In 1958, folks eat a lot of donuts. I gave him my keys and told him I'd had a wonderful, restorative time. His face lit up. "That's good, Mr. Amberson. That's just how it's supposed to be. You're paid until the end of the month. Give me an address where I can send you a refund for your last 2 weeks, and I'll put a check in the mail." I won't be entirely sure where I'm going until the brass in the home office makes up its corporate mind, I said, but I'll be sure to write you. Time travelers lie a lot. He held out his hand. "Been a pleasure having you." I shook it. The pleasure was all mine. I got in my car and drove south. That night I registered at Boston's Parker House and checked out the infamous combat zone. After the weeks of peace on Sebago, the neon jangled my eyes, and the surging crowds of night prowlers, mostly young, mostly male, many wearing uniforms, made me feel both agoraphobic and homesick for those peaceful nights in western Maine, when the few stores closed at 6 and traffic dried up at 10. I spent the following night at the Hotel Harrington in D.C. 3 days later, I was on the west coast of Florida. Chapter 12. I took US 1 south. I ate in a lot of roadside restaurants featuring Mom's home cooking. Places where the blue plate special, including fruit cup to start and pie a la mode for dessert, cost 80 cents. I never saw a single fast food franchise, unless you count Howard Johnson's, with its 28 flavors and Simple Simon logo. I saw a troop of Boy Scouts tending a bonfire of fall leaves with their scoutmaster. I saw women wearing overcoats and galoshes taking in laundry on a gray afternoon when rain threatened. I saw long passenger trains with names like the Southern Flyer and Star of Tampa charging toward those American climes where winter is not allowed. I saw old men smoking pipes on benches in town squares. I saw 1 million churches and a cemetery where a congregation at least 100 strong stood in a circle around an open grave singing the old rugged cross. I saw men building barns. I saw people helping people. 2 of them in a pickup truck stopped to help me when the Sunliner's radiator popped its top and I was broken down by the side of the road. That was in Virginia, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and one of them asked me if I needed a place to sleep. I guess I can imagine that happening in 2011, but it's a stretch. And one more thing. In North Carolina, I stopped to gas up at a Humble oil station, then walked around the corner to use the toilet. There were 2 doors and 3 signs. Men was neatly stenciled over one door, ladies over the other. The 3rd sign was an arrow on a stick. It pointed toward the brush-covered slope behind the station. It said, "Colored." Curious, I walked down the path, being careful to sidle at a couple of points where the oily green shading to maroon leaves of poison ivy were unmistakable. I hoped the dads and moms who might have led their children down to whatever facility waited below were able to identify those troublesome bushes for what they were, because in the late 50s most children wear short pants. There was no facility. What I found at the end of the path was a narrow stream with a board laid across it on a couple of crumbling concrete posts. A man who had to urinate could just stand on the bank, unzip, and let fly. A woman could hold onto a bush, assuming it wasn't poison ivy or poison oak, and squat. The board was what you sat on if you had to take a shit, maybe in the pouring rain. If I ever gave you the idea that 1958's all Andean Opie, remember the path, okay? The one lined with poison ivy and the board over the stream. I settled 60 miles south of Tampa in the town of Sunset Point. For $80 a month, I rented a conch shack on the most beautiful and mostly deserted beach I had ever seen. There were 4 similar shacks on my stretch of sand, all as humble as my own. Of the nouveau ugly McMansions that would later sprout like concrete toadstools in this part of the state, I saw none. There was a supermarket 10 miles south in Nokomis and a sleepy shopping district in Venice. Route 41, the Tamiami Trail, was little more than a country road. You had to go slow on it, particularly toward dusk, because that's when the gators and the armadillos like to cross. Between Sarasota and Venice, there were fruit stands, roadside markets, a couple of bars, and a dance hall called Blackie's. Beyond Venice, brother, you were mostly on your own, at least until you got to Fort Myers. I left George Amberson's real estate persona behind. By the spring of 1959, recessionary times had come to America. On Florida's Gulf Coast, everybody was selling and nobody was buying, so George Amberson became exactly what Al had envisioned, an authorial wannabe whose moderately rich uncle had left him enough to live on, at least for a while. I did write, and not on one project but 2. In the mornings, when I was freshest, I began work on the manuscript you're now reading, if there ever is a you. In the evenings, I worked on a novel that I tentatively called The Murder Place. The place in question was Derry, of course, although I called it Dawson in my book. I began it solely as set decoration, so I'd have something to show if I made friends and one of them asked to see what I was working on. I kept my morning manuscript in a steel lockbox under my bed. Eventually, The Murder Place became more than camouflage. I began to think it was good, and to dream that someday it might even see print. An hour on the memoir in the morning and an hour on the novel at night still left a lot of time to be filled. I tried fishing, and there were plenty of fish to be caught, but I didn't like it and gave it up. Walking was fine at dawn and sunset, but not in the heat of the day. I became a regular patron of Sarasota's one bookstore, and I spent long and mostly happy hours at the little libraries in Nokomis and Osprey. I read and reread Al's Oswald stuff, too. Finally, I recognized this for the obsessive behavior it was and put the notebook in the lockbox with my morning manuscript. I have called those notes exhaustive, and so they seemed to me then, but as time, the conveyor belt on which we all must ride, brought me closer and closer to the point where my life might converge with that of the young assassin-to-be, they began to seem less so. There were holes. Sometimes I cursed Al for forcing me into this mission willy-nilly, but in more clear-headed moments I realized that extra time wouldn't have made any difference. It might have made things worse, and Al probably knew it. Even if he hadn't committed suicide, I would only have had a week or two, and how many books have been written about the chain of events leading up to that day in Dallas? 100? 300? Probably closer to 1,000. Some agreeing with Al's belief that Oswald acted alone, some claiming he'd been part of an elaborate conspiracy, some stating with utter certainty that he hadn't pulled the trigger at all and was exactly what he called himself after his arrest, a patsy. By committing suicide, Al had taken away the scholar's greatest weakness, calling hesitation research. I made occasional trips to Tampa, where discreet questioning led me to a bookmaker named Eduardo Gutierrez. Once he was sure I wasn't a cop, He was delighted to take my action. I first bet the Minneapolis Lakers to beat the Celtics in the '59 championship series, thereby establishing my bona fides as a sucker. The Lakers didn't win a single game. I also bet $400 on the Canadiens to beat the Maple Leafs in the Stanley Cup Series and won. But that was even money. Chump change, cuz, my pal Chas Fratty would have said. My single large strike came in the spring of 1960 when I bet on Venetian Way to beat Ballyache, the heavy favorite in the Kentucky Derby. Gutierrez said he'd give me 4-1 on a G, 5-1 on a double G. I went for the double after making the appropriate noises of hesitation and came away 10,000 richer. He paid off with a Fratty-esque good cheer, but there was a steely glint in his eyes that I didn't care for. Gutierrez was a Cubano who probably didn't weigh 140 soaking wet, but he was also an expat from the New Orleans mob, run in those days by a bad boy named Carlos Marcello. I got this bit of gossip in the billiard parlor next to the barber shop where Gutierrez ran his book, and an apparently never-ending backroom poker game under a photograph of a barely clad Diana Dors. The man with whom I'd been playing 9-ball leaned forward, looked around to make sure we had the corner table to ourselves, then murmured, "You know what they say about the mob, George. Once in, never out." I would have liked to have spoken to Gutierrez about his years in New Orleans, but I didn't think it would be wise to be too curious, especially after my big Derby payday. If I had dared, and if I could have thought of a plausible way to raise the subject, I would have asked Gutierrez if he'd ever been acquainted with another reputed member of the Marcello organization, an ex-pug named Charles Dutz Muret. I somehow think the answer would have been yes, because the past harmonizes with itself. Dutz Muret's wife was Marguerite Oswald's sister, which made him Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle. One day in the spring of 1959, there is spring in Florida. The natives told me it sometimes lasts as long as a week. I opened my mailbox and discovered a call card from the Nokomis Public Library. I had reserved a copy of The Disenchanted, the new Bud Schulberg novel, and it had just come in. I jumped in my Sunliner, no better car for what was then becoming known as the Sun Coast, and drove up to get it. On my way out, I noticed a new poster on the cluttered bulletin board in the foyer. It would have been hard to miss. It was bright blue and featured a shivering cartoon man who was looking at an oversized thermometer where the mercury was registering 10 below zero. "Got a degree problem?" the poster demanded. "You may be eligible for a mail-order certificate from United College of Oklahoma. Write for details." United College of Oklahoma sounded fishier than a mackerel stew, but it gave me an idea. Mostly because I was bored. Oswald was still in the Marines and wouldn't be discharged until September when he would head for Russia. His first move would be an effort to renounce his American citizenship. He wouldn't succeed, but after a showy and probably bogus suicide attempt in a Moscow hotel, the Russians were going to let him stay in their country. On approval, so to speak. He'd be there for 30 months or so, working at a radio factory in Minsk, and at a party he would meet a girl named Marina Prusakova. Red dress, white slippers, Al had written in his notes. Pretty. Dressed for dancing. Fine for him, but what was I going to do in the meantime? United College offered one possibility. I wrote for details and received a prompt response. The catalog touted an absolute plethora of degrees. I was fascinated to discover that for $300, cash or money order, I could receive a bachelor's in English. All I had to do was pass a test consisting of 50 multiple-choice questions. I got the money order, mentally kissed my 300 goodbye, and sent in an application. 2 weeks later, I received a thin manila envelope from United College. Inside were 2 smearily mimeographed sheets. The questions were wonderful. Here are 2 of my favorites. Question number 22. What was Moby's last name? A. Tom, B. Dick, C. Harry, D. John. Question number 37. Who wrote The House of Seven Tables? A. Charles Dickens, B. Henry James, C. N. Bradstreet, D. Nathaniel Hawthorne, E. None of these. When I finished enjoying this wonderful test, I filled out the answers with the occasional cry of, "You've got to be shitting me," and sent it back to Enid, Oklahoma. I got a postcard by return mail congratulating me on passing my exam. After I'd paid an additional $50 administration fee, I was informed I would be sent my degree. So I was told, and lo, so it came to pass. The degree was a good deal better looking than the test had been, and came with an impressive gold seal. When I presented it to a representative of the Sarasota County School Board, that worthy accepted it without question and put me on the substitute list, which is how I ended up teaching again for 1 or 2 days each week during the 1959 through 1960 academic year. It was good to be back. I enjoyed the students, boys with flat-top crew cuts, girls with ponytails and shin-length poodle skirts, although I was painfully aware that the faces I saw in the various classrooms I visited were all of the plain vanilla variety. Those days of substituting reacquainted me with the basic fact of my personality. I liked writing and had discovered I was good at it, but what I loved was teaching. It filled me up in some way I can't explain or want to. Explanations are such cheap poetry. My best day as a sub came at West Sarasota High after I'd told an American Lit class the basic story of The Catcher in the Rye, a book which was not, of course, allowed in the school library and would have been confiscated if brought into those sacred halls by a student, and then encouraged them to talk about Holden Caulfield's chief complaint, that school, grown-ups, and American life in general were all phony. The kids started slow, but by the time the bell rang, everyone was trying to talk at once, and 6 risked tardiness at their next classes to offer some final opinion on what was wrong with the society they saw around them and the lives their parents had planned for them. Their eyes were bright, their faces flushed with excitement. I had no doubt there was going to be a run on a certain dark red paperback at the area bookstores. The last one to leave was a muscular kid wearing a football sweater. To me, he looked like Moose Mason in the Archie comic books. "I wish you was here all the time, Mr. Emberson," he said in his soft southern accent. "I dig you the most." He didn't just dig me, he dug me the most. Nothing can compare to hearing something like that from a 17-year-old kid who looks like he might be fully awake for the first time in his academic career. Later that month, the principal called me into his office, offered some pleasantries and a Coca-Cola, then asked, "Son, are you a subversive?" I assured him I was not. I told him I'd voted for Ike. He seemed satisfied, but suggested I might stick more to the generally accepted reading list in the future. Hairstyles change and skirt lengths and slang, but high school administrations, never. In a college class once, this was at the University of Maine, a real college from which I had obtained a real BS degree, I heard a psychology prof opine that humans actually do possess a sixth sense. He called it hunch think, and said it was most well developed in mystics and outlaws. I was no mystic, but I was both an exile from my own time and a murderer. I might consider the shooting of Frank Dunning justified, but the police certainly wouldn't see it that way. If those things didn't make me an outlaw, nothing could. My advice to you in situations where danger appears to threaten, the prof said that day in 1995, is heed the hunch. I decided to do just that in July of 1960. I was becoming increasingly uneasy about Eduardo Gutierrez. He was a little guy, but there were those reputed mob connections to consider, and the glint in his eyes when he'd paid off on my derby bet, which I now considered foolishly large. Why had I made it when I was still far from broke? It wasn't greed. It was more the way a good hitter feels, I suppose, when he's presented with a hanging curveball. In some cases, you just can't help swinging for the fences. I swang, as Leo the Lip DeRocher used to put it in his colorful radio broadcasts, but now I regretted it. I purposely lost the last 2 wagers I put down with Gutierrez, trying my best to make myself look foolish. Just a garden-variety plunger who happened to get lucky once and would presently lose it all back, but my hunch think told me it wasn't playing very well. My hunch think didn't like it when Gutierrez started greeting me with, "Oh, see? Here comes my Yankee from Yankee Land." Not the Yankee, my Yankee. Suppose he had detailed one of his poker-playing friends to follow me back to Sunset Point from Tampa. Was it possible he might send some of his other poker-playing friends or a couple of muscle boys hungry to get out from under whatever loan shark vig Gutierrez was currently charging to do a little salvage operation and get back whatever remained of that $10,000? My front mind thought that was the sort of lame plot device that turned up on PI shows like 77 Sunset Strip. But hunch said something different. Hunch said that the little man with the thinning hair was perfectly capable of green-lighting a home invasion and telling the black baggers to beat the shit out of me if I tried to object. I didn't want to get beaten up, and I didn't want to be robbed. Most of all, I didn't want to risk my pages falling into the hands of a mob-connected bookie. I didn't like the idea of running away with my tail between my legs, but hell, I had to make my way to Texas sooner or later in any case. So, why not sooner? Besides, discretion is the better part of valor. I learned that at my mother's knee. So, after a mostly sleepless July night when the sonar pings of hunch had been particularly strong, I packed my worldly goods. The lockbox containing my memoir and my cash I hid beneath the Sunliner's spare tire, left a note and a final rent check for my landlord, and headed north on US 19. I spent my first night on the road in a decaying Defuniak Springs motor court. The screens had holes in them, and until I turned out my room's one light, an unshaded bulb dangling on a length of electrical cord, I was beset by mosquitoes the size of fighter planes. Yet I slept like a baby. There were no nightmares, and the pings of my interior radar had fallen silent. That was good enough for me. I spent the 1st of August in Gulfport, Mississippi. Although the first place I stopped at on the town's outskirts refused to take me. The clerk of the Red Top Inn explained to me that it was for Negros only, and directed me to the Southern hospitality, which he called Gulfport's finest. Maybe so, but on the whole, I think I would have preferred the Red Top. The slide guitar coming from the bar and barbecue next door had sounded terrific. New Orleans wasn't precisely on my way to Big D, but with the hunch sonar quiet, I found myself in a touristy frame of mind, although it wasn't the French Quarter, the Bienville Street steamboat landing, or the Vieux Carré I wanted to visit. I bought a map from a street vendor and found my way to the one destination that did interest me. I parked and after a 5-minute walk found myself standing in front of 4905 Magazine Street. where Lee and Marina Oswald would be living with their daughter June in the last spring and summer of John Kennedy's life. It was a shambling, not quite wreck of a building with a waist-high iron fence surrounding an overgrown yard. The paint on the lower story, once white, was now a peeling shade of urine yellow. The upper story was unpainted gray barnboard. A piece of cardboard blocking a broken window up there read, "For rent, call MU3 4192. Rusty screens enclosed the porch where, in September of 1963, Lee Oswald would sit in his underwear after dark, whispering, "Pow, pow, pow," under his breath and dry-firing what was going to become the most famous rifle in American history at passing pedestrians. I was thinking of this when someone tapped me on the shoulder and I almost screamed. I guess I did jump because the young black man who had accosted me took a respectful step backward, raising his open hands. "Sorry, sir. Sorry, sure didn't mean to make you startle." "It's all right," I said. "It's totally my fault." This declaration seemed to make him uneasy, but he had business on his mind and pressed ahead with it, although we had to come close again because his business entailed a tone of voice lower than the conversational. He wanted to know if I might be interested in buying a few joysticks. I thought I knew what he was talking about, but wasn't entirely sure until he added, "High-quality swamp weed, sir." I told him I'd pass, but if he could direct me to a good hotel in the Paris of the South, it would be worth half a rock to me. When he spoke again, his speech was a good deal crisper. "Opinions differ, but I'd say the Hotel Monteleone." He gave me good directions. "Thanks," I said, and handed over the coin. It disappeared into one of his many pockets. "Say, what are you looking at that place for, anyway?" He nodded toward the ramshackle apartment house. "You think about buying it?" A little twinkle of the old George Amberson surfaced. "You must live around here. Do you think it would be a good deal?" "Some on this street might be, but not that one. To me, it looks haunted." "Not yet," I said, and headed for my car, leaving him to look after me, perplexed. I took the lockbox out of the trunk and put it on the Sunliner's passenger seat, meaning to hand-carry it up to my room at the Monteleone. And I did. Just that. But while the doorman was getting the rest of my bags, I spotted something on the floor of the back seat that made me flush with a sense of guilt that was far out of proportion to what the object was. But childhood teachings are the strongest teachings, and another thing I was taught at my mother's knee was to always return library books on time. "Mr. Doorman, would you hand me that book, please?" I asked. "Yes, sir. Happy to." It was the Chapman Report, which I'd borrowed from the Nokomis Public Library a week or so before deciding it was time to put on my traveling shoes. The sticker in the corner of the transparent protective cover, "7 days only, be kind to the next borrower," reproached me. When I got to my room, I checked my watch and saw it was only 6 p.m. In the summer, the library didn't open until noon, but stayed open until 8. Long distance is one of the few things more expensive in 1960 than in 2011, but that childish sense of guilt was still on me. I called the hotel operator and gave her the Nokomis Library's telephone number, reading it off the card pocket pasted to the back flyleaf of the book. The little message below it, "Please call if you will be more than 3 days late in your return," made me feel more like a dog than ever. My operator talked to another operator. Behind them, faint voices babbled. I realized that in the time I came from, most of those distant speakers would be dead. Then the phone began to ring on the other end. "Hello? Nokomis Public Library?" It was Hattie Wilkerson's voice, but that sweet old lady sounded like she was stuck in a very large steel barrel. "Hello? Mrs. Wilkerson? Hello? Hello? Do you hear me? Drat it, long distance." "Hattie!" I was shouting now. "It's George Amberson calling." "George Amberson? Oh, my soul, where are you calling from, George? I almost told her the truth, but the hunch radar gave out a single very loud ping, and I bellowed, Baton Rouge! In Louisiana? Yes, I have one of your books. I just realized I'm going to send it back. You don't need to shout, George. The connection is much better now. The operator must not have stuck our little plug in the whole way. I'm so glad to hear from you. It's God's providence that you weren't there. We were worried, even though the fire chief said the house was empty. What are you talking about, Hattie? My place on the beach? But really, what else? Yes, someone threw a flamin' bottle of gasoline through the window. The whole thing went up in a matter of minutes. Chief Duran thinks it was kids who were out drinking and carousing. There's so many bad apples now. It's because they're afraid of the bomb. That's what my husband says. So, George, are you still there? Yes, I said. Which book do you have? What? Which book do you have? Don't make me check the card catalog. Oh, the Chapman report. Well, send it back as soon as you can, won't you? We have quite a few people waiting for that one. Irving Wallace is extremely popular. Yes, I said, I'll be sure to do that. And I'm very sorry about your house. Did you lose your things? I have everything important with me. Thank God for that. Will you be coming back soon? There was a click loud enough to sting my ear, then the burr of an open line. I replaced the receiver in the cradle. Would I be coming back soon? I saw no need to call back and answer that question, but I would watch out for the past, because it senses change agents, and it has teeth. I sent the Chapman report back to the Nokomis Library first thing in the morning. Then I left for Dallas. 3 days later, I was sitting on a bench in Dealey Plaza and looking at the square brick cube of the Texas School Book Depository. It was late afternoon and blazingly hot. I had pulled down my tie. If you don't wear one in 1960, even on hot days, you're apt to attract unwanted attention. And unbuttoned the top button of my plain white shirt, but it didn't help much. Neither did the scant shade of the elm behind my bench. When I checked into the Adolphus Hotel on Commerce Street, I was offered a choice, air conditioning or no air conditioning. I paid the extra $5 for a room where the window unit lowered the temperature all the way to 78. And if I had a brain in my head, I'd go back to it now before I keeled over with heat stroke. When night came, maybe it would cool off, just a little. But that brick cube held my gaze, and the windows, especially the one on the right corner of the 6th floor, seemed to be examining me. There was a palpable sense of wrongness about that building. You, if there ever is a you, might scoff at that, calling it nothing but the effect of my unique foreknowledge, but that didn't account for what was really holding me on that bench in spite of the beating heat. What did that was the sense that I had seen the building before. It reminded me of the Kitchener Iron Works in Derry. The book depository wasn't a ruin, but it conveyed the same sense of sentient menace. I remembered coming on that submerged, soot-blackened smokestack, lying in the weeds like a giant prehistoric snake dozing in the sun. I remembered looking into its dark bore, so large I could have walked into it. And I remember feeling that something was in there, something alive, something that wanted me to walk into it so I could visit, maybe for a long, long time. Come on in, the 6th floor window whispered. Take a look around. Place is empty now. The skeleton crew that works here in the summer has gone home, but if you walk around to the loading dock by the railroad tracks, you'll find an open door. I'm quite sure of it. After all, what is there in here to protect? Nothing but school books, and even the students they're meant for don't really want them. As you well know, Jake. So come in. Come on up to the 6th floor. In your time, there's a museum here. People come from all over the world, and some of them still weep for the man who was killed and all he might have done. But this is 1960. Kennedy's still a senator, and Jake Epping doesn't exist. Only George Amberson exists. A man with a short haircut and a sweaty shirt and a pulled-down tie. A man of his time, so to speak. So come on up. Are you afraid of ghosts? How can you be when the crime hasn't happened yet? But there were ghosts up there, maybe not on Magazine Street in New Orleans, but there, oh yes. Only I'd never have to face them because I was going to enter the book depository no more than I had ventured into that fallen smokestack in Derry. Oswald would get his job stacking textbooks just a month or so before the assassination, and waiting that long would be cutting things far too close. No. I intended to follow the plan Al had roughed out in the closing section of his notes, the one titled Conclusions on How to Proceed. Sure as he was about his lone gunman theory, Al had held on to a small but statistically significant possibility that he was wrong. In his notes, he called it the window of uncertainty, as in 6th floor window. He had meant to close that window for good on April 10th, 1963, over half a year before Kennedy's trip to Dallas, and I thought his idea made sense. Possibly later that April, more likely on the night of the 10th, why wait? I would kill the husband of Marina and the father of June, just as I had Frank Dunning, and with no more compunction. If you saw a spider scuttering across the floor toward your baby's crib, you might hesitate. You might even consider trapping it in a bottle and putting it out in the yard so it could go on living its little life. But if you were sure that spider was poisonous, a black widow, in that case you wouldn't hesitate, not if you were sane. You'd put your foot on it and crush it. I had a plan of my own for the years between August of 1960 and April of 1963. I'd keep my eye on Oswald when he came back from Russia, but I wouldn't interfere. Because of the butterfly effect, I couldn't afford to. If there's a stupider metaphor than a chain of events in the English language, I don't know what it is. Chains, other than the ones we all learned to make out of strips of colored paper in kindergarten, I suppose, are strong. We use them to pull engine blocks out of trucks and to bind the arms and legs of dangerous prisoners. That was no longer reality as I understood it. Events are flimsy, I tell you. They are houses of cards. And by approaching Oswald, let alone trying to warn him off a crime which he had not yet even conceived, I would be giving away my only advantage. The butterfly would spread its wings, and Oswald's course would change. Little changes at first, maybe, but as the Bruce Springsteen song tells us, from small things, baby, big things one day come. They might be good changes, ones that would save the man who was now the junior senator from Massachusetts. But I didn't believe that, because the past is obdurate. In 1962, according to one of Al's scribbled marginal notes, Kennedy was going to be in Houston at Rice University making a speech about going to the moon. Open auditorium, no bulletproof podium, Al had written. Houston was less than 300 miles from Dallas. What if Oswald decided to shoot the president there? Or, suppose Oswald was exactly what he claimed to be, a patsy. What if I scared him out of Dallas and back to New Orleans and Kennedy still died, the victim of some crazy mafia or CIA plot? Would I have courage enough to go back through the rabbit hole and start all over, save the Dunning family again, save Carolyn Poulin again? I'd already given nearly 2 years to this mission. Would I be willing to invest 5 more with the outcome as uncertain as ever? Better not to have to find out. Better to make sure. On my way to Texas from New Orleans, I had decided the best way to monitor Oswald without getting in his way would be to live in Dallas while he was in the sister city of Fort Worth, then relocate to Fort Worth when Oswald moved his family to Dallas. The idea had the virtue of simplicity, but it wouldn't work. I realized that in the weeks after looking at the Texas School Book Depository for the first time, and feeling very strongly that it was like Nietzsche's abyss looking back at me. I spent August and September of that presidential election year driving the Sunliner around Dallas, apartment hunting even after all this time, sorely missing my GPS unit and frequently stopping to ask for directions. Nothing seemed right. At first, I thought that was about the apartments themselves. Then, as I began to get a better sense of the city, I realized it was about me. The simple truth was that I didn't like Dallas. And 8 weeks of hard study was enough to make me believe there was a lot not to like. The Times-Herald, which many Dallasites routinely called the Slimes Herald, was a tiresome juggernaut of nickel boosterism. The morning news might wax lyrical, talking about how Dallas and Houston were in a race to the heavens. But the skyscrapers of which the editorial spoke were an island of architectural blah, surrounded by rings of what I came to think of as the great American flat cult. The newspapers ignored the slum neighborhoods where the divisions along racial lines were just beginning to melt a little. Further out were endless middle-class housing developments, mostly owned by veterans of World War II and Korea. The vets had wives who spent their days pledging the furniture and maytagging the clothes. Most had 2.5 children. The teenagers mowed lawns, delivered the Slimes Herald on bicycles, turtle-waxed the family car, and listened, furtively, to Chuck Berry on transistor radios, maybe telling their anxious parents he was white. Beyond the suburban houses with their whirling lawn sprinklers were those vast, flat tracts of empty. Here and there, rolling irrigators still serviced cotton crops, but mostly king cotton was dead, replaced by endless acres of corn and soybeans. The real Dallas County crops were electronics, textiles, bullshit, and black money petrodollars. There weren't many derricks in the area, but when the wind blew from the west, where the Permian Basin is, the Twin Cities stank of oil and natural gas. The downtown business district was full of Sharpies hustling around in what I came to think of as the full Dallas. Checked sport coats, narrow neckwear held down with bloated tie clips. These clips, the 60s version of bling, usually came with diamonds or plausible substitutes sparkling in their centers, white Sansa-belt pants, and gaudy boots with complex stitching. They worked in banks and investment companies. They sold soybean futures and oil leases and real estate to the west of the city, land where nothing would grow except Jimson and tumbleweed. They clapped each other on the shoulders with beringed hands and called each other son. On their belts, where businessmen in 2011 carry their cell phones, many carried handguns in hand-tooled holsters. There were billboards advocating the impeachment of Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren, billboards showing a snarling Nikita Khrushchev. "Niet, Comrade Khrushchev," the billboard copy read. "We will bury you." There was one on West Commerce Street that read, "The American Communist Party favors integration. Think about it." That one had been paid for by something called the Tea Party Society. Twice, on businesses whose names suggested they were Jewish-owned, I saw soaped swastikas. I didn't like Dallas. No, sir. No, ma'am. No way. I hadn't liked it from the moment I checked into the Adolphus and saw the restaurant maitre d' gripping a cringing young waiter by the arm and shouting into his face. Nevertheless, my business was here, and here I would stay. That was what I thought then. On the 22nd of September, I finally found a place that looked livable. It was on Blackwell Street in North Dallas, a detached garage that had been converted into a pretty nice duplex apartment. Greatest advantage? Air conditioning. Greatest disadvantage? The owner, landlord, Ray Mac Johnson, was a racist who shared with me that if I took the place, it would be wise to stay away from nearby Greenville Avenue, where there were a lot of mixed-race juke joints and coons with the kind of knives he called switchers. "I got everything in the world against niggers," he told me. "No, sir. It was God who cursed them to their position, not me. You know that, don't you?" I guess I missed that part of the Bible. He squinted suspiciously. "What are you, Methodist?" "Yes," I said. It seemed a lot safer than saying I was, denominationally speaking, nothing. "You need to get in the Baptist way of churching, son. Ours welcomes newcomers. You take this place, and maybe some Sunday you can come with me and my wife." "Maybe so," I agreed, reminding myself to be in a coma that Sunday, possibly dead. Mr. Johnson, meanwhile, had returned to his original scripture. "You see, Noah got drunk this one time on the ark, and he was a-layin' on his bed, naked as a jaybird. 2 of his sons wouldn't look at him. They just turned the other way and put a blanket over him. I don't know, it might have been a sheet. But Ham, he was the coon of the family, looked on his father in his nakedness, and God cursed him and all his race to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. So there it is. That's what's behind it. Genesis chapter 9. You go on and look it up, Mr. Amberson." "Uh-huh," I said, telling myself that I had to go someplace. I couldn't afford to stay at the Adolphus indefinitely. Telling myself I could live with a little racism. I wouldn't melt. Telling myself it was the temper of the times, and it was probably the same just about everywhere, only I didn't quite believe it. "I'll think it over and let you know in a day or two, Mr. Johnson." "You don't want to wait too long, son. This place will go fast. You have a blessed day now." The blessed day was another scorcher, and apartment hunting was thirsty work. After leaving Ray Mac Johnson's learned company, I felt in need of a beer. I decided to get one on Greenville Avenue. If Mr. Johnson discouraged the neighborhood, I thought I ought to check it out. He was correct on 2 counts. The street was integrated, more or less, and it was rough. It was also lively. I parked and strolled, savoring the carny atmosphere. I passed almost 24 bars, a few second-run movie houses. "Come in, it's cool inside," read the banners flapping from the marquees in a hot, oil-smelling Texas wind. And a striptease joint where a street-side barker yelled, "Girls, girls, girls, best burlicue in the whole damn world, best burlicue you've ever seen, these ladies shave if you know what I mean." I also passed 3 or 4 check-cashing and quickie loan storefronts. Standing bold as brass in front of one, Faith Financial, where trust is our watchword, was a chalkboard with the Daily Line printed at the top and "For amusement only" at the bottom. Men in straw hats and suspenders, a look only dedicated punters can pull off, were standing around it discussing the posted odds. Some had racing forms, some had the morning news sports section. For amusement only, I thought. Yeah, right. For a moment I thought of my beachfront shack, burning in the night, the flames pulled high into the starry black by the wind off the Gulf. Amusement had its drawbacks, especially when it came to betting. Music and the smell of beer wafted out of open doorways. I heard Jerry Lee Lewis singing "Whole Lot of Shakin' Going On" from one juke and Furlan Husky emoting wings of a dove from the one next door. I was propositioned by 4 hookers and a sidewalk vendor who was selling hubcaps, rhinestone glittery straight razors, and Lone Star State flags embossed with the words, "Don't mess with Texas." Try translating that one into Latin. That troubling sense of déjà vu was very strong, that feeling that things were wrong here, just as they'd been wrong before, which was crazy. I'd never been on Greenville Avenue in my life, but it was also undeniable, a thing of the heart rather than the head. All at once I decided I didn't want a beer, and I didn't want to rent Mr. Johnson's converted garage either, no matter how good the air conditioning was. I had just passed a watering hole called the Desert Rose, where the Rockola was blasting muddy waters. As I turned to start back to where my car was parked, a man came flying out the door. He stumbled and went sprawling on the sidewalk. There was a burst of laughter from the bar's dark interior, and a woman yelled, "And don't come back, you dickless wonder!" This produced more and heartier laughter. The ejected patron was bleeding from the nose, which was bent severely to one side, and also from a scrape that ran down the left side of his face, from temple to jawline. His eyes were huge and shocked. His untucked shirt flapped almost to his knees as he grabbed a lamppost and pulled himself to his feet. Once on them, he glared around at everything, seeing nothing. I took a step or two toward him, but before I could get there, one of the women who'd asked me if I'd like a date came swaying up on stiletto heels. Only she wasn't a woman. Not really. She couldn't have been more than 16, with large dark eyes and smooth coffee-colored skin. She was smiling, but not in a mean way, and when the man with the bloody face staggered, she took his arm. "Easy, sweetheart," she said. "You need to settle down before you—" He raked up the hanging tails of his shirt. The pearl-handled grip of a pistol, much smaller than the one I'd bought at Macon Sporting Goods, really not much more than a toy, lay against the pale fat hanging over the beltless waistband of his gabardine slacks. His fly was half unzipped, and I could see boxer shorts with red racing cars on them. I remember that. He pulled the gun, pressed the muzzle against the streetwalker's midriff, and pulled the trigger. There was a stupid little pop, the sound of a ladyfinger firecracker going off in a tin can, no more than that. The woman screamed and sat down on the sidewalk with her hands laced over her belly. "You shot me!" She sounded more outraged than hurt, but blood had begun to spill through her fingers. "You shot me, you pissant bugger! Why did you shoot me?" He took no notice, only yanked open the door of the Desert Rose. I was still standing where I'd been when he shot the pretty young hooker, partly because I was frozen by shock, but mostly because all of this happened in a matter of seconds, longer than it would take Oswald to kill the President of the United States, maybe, but not much. "Is this what you want, Linda?" he shouted. "If this is what you want, I'll give you what you want." He put the muzzle of the gun into his ear and pulled the trigger. I folded my handkerchief and pressed it gently over the hole in the young girl's red dress. I don't know how badly she was hurt, but she was lively enough to produce a steady stream of colorful phrases she had probably not learned from her mother. On the other hand, who knows? And when one man in the gathering crowd moved a little too close to suit her, she snarled, "Quit looking up my dress, you nosy bastard. For that you pay." "This poor old sumbitch here is dead as can be," someone remarked. He was kneeling beside the man who'd been thrown out of the Desert Rose. A woman began to shriek. Approaching sirens, they were shrieking too. I noticed one of the other ladies who'd approached me during my stroll down Greenville Avenue, a redhead in capri pants. I beckoned to her. She touched her chest in a "Who, me?" gesture, and I nodded. "Yes, you." "Hold this handkerchief on the wound," I told her. "Try to stop the bleeding. I've got to go." She gave me a wise little smile. "Don't want to hang around for the cops?" Not really. I don't know any of these people. I was just passing by. The redhead knelt by the bleeding, cursing girl on the sidewalk and pressed down on the sodden handkerchief. "Honey," she said, "aren't we all?" I couldn't sleep that night. I'd start to drift, then see Ray Mac Johnson's sweaty, oily, complacent face as he blamed 2,000 years of slavery, murder, and exploitation on some teenage kid eyeballing his father's gear shift. I'd jerk awake, settle back, drift, and see the little man with the unzipped fly sticking the muzzle of his hideout gun in his ear. "Is this what you want, Linda?" One final burst of petulance before the big sleep, and I'd start awake again. Next time it was men in a black sedan throwing a gasoline bomb through the front window of my place on Sunset Point, Eduardo Gutierrez attempting to get rid of his Yankee from Yankee Land. Why? Because he didn't like to lose big, and that was all. For him, that was enough. Finally, I gave up and sat down by the window where the hotel air conditioner was rattling gamely away. In Maine, the night would be crisp enough to start bringing color to the trees, but here in Dallas, it was still 75 at 2:30 in the morning, and humid. "Dallas Dairy," I said as I looked down into the silent ditch of Commerce Street. The brick cube of the book depository wasn't visible, but it was close by, walking distance. Dairy, Dallas. Each name comprised of 2 syllables that broke on the double letter, like a stick of kindling over a bent knee. I couldn't stay here. Another 30 months in Big D would send me crazy. How long would it be before I started seeing graffiti like, "I will kill my mother soon," or glimpsed a Juju Jesus floating down the Trinity River? Fort Worth might be better, but Fort Worth was still too close. Why do I have to stay in either? This thought came to me shortly after 3 a.m., and with the force of a revelation. I had a fine car, a car I'd sort of fallen in love with, to tell you the truth, and there was no shortage of good, fast roads in Central Texas, many of them recently built. By the turn of the 21st century, they would probably be choked with traffic, but in 1960, they were almost eerily deserted. There were speed limits, but they weren't enforced. In Texas, even the state cops were believers in the gospel of put the pedal to the metal and let her bellow. I could move out from beneath the suffocating shadow I felt over this city. I could find a place that was smaller and less daunting, a place that didn't feel so filled with hate and violence. In broad daylight, I could tell myself I was imagining those things, but not in the ditch of the morning. There were, undoubtedly, good people in Dallas, thousands upon thousands of them, the great majority. But that undercord was there, and sometimes it broke out, as it had outside the Desert Rose.
Bevy from the levee had said that in Derry I think the bad times are over. I wasn't convinced about Derry, and I felt the same way about Dallas, even with its worst days still over 3 years away.
"I'll commute," I said. "George wants a nice, quiet place to work on his book. But since the book is about a city, a haunted city, he really has to commute, doesn't he? To get material." It was no wonder it took me almost 2 months to think of this. Life's simplest answers are often the easiest to overlook. I went back to bed and fell asleep almost at once. That next day I drove south, out of Dallas, on Highway 77. An hour and a half took me into Denholm County. I turned west onto State Road 109, mostly because I liked the billboard marking the intersection. It showcased a heroic young football player wearing a gold helmet, black jersey, and gold leggings. "Denholm Lions," the billboard proclaimed, 3-time district champs, state championship bound in 1960. We've got gym power. Whatever that is, I thought. But of course, every high school has its secret signs and signals. It's what makes kids feel like they're on the inside. 5 miles up Highway 109, I came to the town of Jody. Population 1,280. The sign said. "Welcome, stranger." Halfway up the wide, tree-lined main street, I saw a little restaurant with a sign in the window reading, "Best shakes, fries, and burgers in all of Texas." It was called Al's Diner. Of course it was. I parked in one of the slant spaces out front, went in, and ordered the pronghorn special, which turned out to be a double cheeseburger with barbecue sauce. It came with mesquite fries and a rodeo thick shake, your choice of vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry. A pronghorn wasn't quite as good as a fat burger, but it wasn't bad. And the fries were just the way I liked them, crispy, salty, and a little overdone. Al turned out to be Al Stevens, a skinny, middle-aged guy who looked nothing like Al Templeton. He had a rockabilly hairdo, a gray-streaked bandito mustache, a thick Texas drawl, and a paper hat worn jauntily cocked over one eye. When I asked him if there was much to rent in the town of Jody, he laughed and said, "Take your pick. But when it comes to jobs, this ain't exactly a center of commerce. Ranch land mostly, and you'll pardon me saying, but you don't look like the cowboy type." "I'm not," I said. "Actually, I'm more the book-writing type." "Get out! Anything I might have read?" "Not yet," I said. "I'm still trying. I've got about half a novel written, and a couple of publishers have shown some interest. I'm looking for a quiet place to finish." "Well, Jody's quiet, all right." Al rolled his eyes. "When it comes to quiet, I reckon we could take out a patent. Only gets noisy on Friday nights." "Football?" "Yes, sir. Whole town goes. Halftime comes, they all roar like lions, then give out the Jim yell. You can hear 'em 2 miles away. It's pretty comical." "Who's Jim?" "Ledoux, the quarterback. We've had us some good teams, but ain't never been a QB like Ledoux on a Denholm team. And he's only a junior. People been talking about the state championship. That seems a tad optimistic to me, with those big Dallas schools just up the road, but a little hope never hurt anybody. That's what I reckon." "Football aside, how's the school?" "It's real fine. A lot of people were doubtful about this consolidation thing at first. I was one of them. But it's turned out to be a good thing. They got over 700 this year. Some of them bus in an hour or more. But they don't seem to mind. Probably saves them chores at home." "Is your book about high school kids, blackboard jungle kind of thing?" "Because there ain't no gangs or anything out here. Out here, kids still mind their manners." "Nothing like that. I've got savings, but I wouldn't mind stretching what I've got with some substitute work. I can't teach full-time and still write." "Course not," he said respectfully. "My degree's from Oklahoma, but—" I shrugged to show Oklahoma wasn't in Texas's league, but a man could hope. "Well, you ought to talk to Deke Simmons. He's the principal. Comes in for dinner most evenings. His wife died a couple of years back." "Sorry to hear that," I said. "Oh, we all were. He's a nice man. Most people are in these parts, Mr. Amberson, George Amberson." "Well, George, we're pretty sleepy, except on Friday nights. But you could do worse. Might could even learn to roar like a lion at halftime." "Maybe I could," I said. "You come on back around 6. That's usually the time Deke comes in." He put his arms on the counter and leaned over them. "Want a tip?" "Sure." "He'll probably have his lady friend with him, Miss Corcoran, the librarian up to the school. He's kind of been sparking her since last Christmas or so. I've heard that Mimi Corcoran's the one who really runs Denholm Consolidated because she runs him. If you impress her, I reckon you're in like Flynn." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. Weeks of apartment hunting in Dallas had netted me exactly one possible, which turned out to be owned by a man I didn't want to rent from. It took me 3 hours in Jody to find a place that looked fine. Not an apartment, but a tidy little 5-room shotgun house. It was for sale, the real estate agent told me, but the couple who owned it would be willing to rent to the right party. There was an elm-shaded backyard, a garage for the Sunliner, and central air conditioning. The rent was reasonable, given the amenities. Freddie Quinlan was the agent's name. He was curious about me. I think the Maine license plate on my car struck him as exotic, but not unduly so. Best of all, I felt I was out from under the shadow that had lain over me in Dallas, Derry, and Sunset Point, where my last long-term rental now lay in ashes. "Well," Quinlan asked, "what do you think?" "I want it, but I can't give you a yes or no this afternoon. I have to see a fellow first. I don't suppose you'll be open tomorrow, will you?" "Yes, sir, I will. Saturdays I'm open until noon. Then I go home and watch the game of the week on TV. Looks like it could be a heck of a series this year." "Yes," I said, "it certainly does." Quinlan extended his hand. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Amberson. I bet you'd like Jody. We're good people around here. Hope it works out for you." I shook with him. "So do I." Like the man said, a little hope never hurt anybody. That evening I returned to Al's Diner and introduced myself to the principal of Denholm Consolidated and his librarian lady friend. They invited me to join them. Deke Simmons was tall, bald, and 60-ish. Mimi Corcoran was bespectacled and tanned. The blue eyes behind her bifocals were sharp, looking me up and down for clues. She walked with the aid of a cane, handling it with the careless, almost contemptuous dexterity of long use. Both of them, I was amused to see, were carrying Denholm pennants and wearing gold buttons that read, "We've got gym power." It was Friday night in Texas. Simmons asked me how I was liking Jody. A lot. How long I'd been in Dallas, since August, and if I enjoyed high school football. Yes, indeed. The closest he got to anything substantive was asking me if I felt confident in my ability to make kids mind, because he said a lot of substitutes had a problem with that. "These young teachers send them to us in the office like we didn't have anything better to do," he said, and then chomped his pronghorn burger. "Sauce, Deke," Mimi said, and he obediently wiped the corner of his mouth with a paper napkin from the dispenser. She, meanwhile, was continuing her inventory of me. Sport coat, tie, haircut, the shoes she'd taken a good look at as I crossed to her booth. "Do you have references, Mr. Amberson?" "Yes, ma'am. I did quite a bit of substitute teaching in Sarasota County." "And in Maine?" "Not so much there, although I taught for 3 years in Wisconsin on a regular basis before quitting to work full-time on my book, or as much full-time as my finances would allow." I did have a reference from St. Vincent's High School in Madison. It was a good reference. I had written it myself. Of course, if anyone checked back, I'd be hung. Deke Simmons wouldn't do it, but sharp-eyed Mimi with the leathery cowboy skin might. "And what is your novel about?" This might also hang me, but I decided to be honest. As honest as possible, anyway, given my peculiar circumstances. "A series of murders and their effect on the community where they happen." "Oh, my goodness," Deke said. She tapped his wrist. "Hush! Go on, Mr. Amberson." My original setting was a fictional Maine city. I called it Dawson, but then I decided it might be more realistic if I set it in an actual city, a bigger one. I thought Tampa at first, but it was wrong somehow. She waved Tampa away. "Too pastel, too many tourists. You were looking for something a little more insular, I suspect." A very sharp lady. She knew more about my book than I did. "That's right. So I decided to try Dallas. I think it's the right place, but you wouldn't want to live there?" "Exactly." "I see." She picked at her piece of deep-fried fish. Deke was looking at her with a mildly poleaxed expression. Whatever it was he wanted as he went cantering down the backstretch of life, she appeared to have it. Not so strange. Everybody loves somebody sometime, as Dean Martin would so wisely point out, but not for another few years. And when you're not writing, what do you like to read, Mr. Amberson? Oh, just about everything. Have you read The Catcher in the Rye? Uh-oh, I thought. Yes, ma'am. She looked impatient at this. Oh, call me Mimi. Even the kids call me Mimi, although I insist they put a Ms. with it for propriety's sake. What do you think of Mr. Salinger's cri de coeur? Lie or tell the truth? But it wasn't a serious question. This woman would read a lie the way I could read, well, an impeach Earl Warren billboard. I think it says a lot about how lousy the 50s were, and a lot about how good the 60s can be. If the Holden Caulfields of America don't lose their outrage, that is, and their courage. Picking plenty at her fish, but not eating any that I could see. No wonder she looked like you could staple a string to the back of her dress and fly her like a kite. Do you believe it should be in the school library? I sighed, thinking how much I would have enjoyed living and teaching part-time in the town of Jody, Texas. Actually, ma'am, Mimi, I do, although I believe it should be checked out only to certain students and at the librarian's discretion. The librarians, not the parents? No, ma'am, that's a slippery slope. Mimi Corcoran burst into a wide smile and turned to her beau. Deke, this fellow doesn't belong on the substitute list. He should be full-time. Mimi, I know no vacancy in the English department, but if he sticks around, maybe he can step in after that idiot Phil Bateman retires. Memes, that is very indiscreet. Yes, she said, and actually dropped me a wink. Also very true. Send Deke your references from Florida, Mr. Amberson. They should do nicely. Better yet, bring them in yourself next week. The school year has started. No sense in losing time. Call me George, I said. Yes, indeed, she said. She pushed her plate away. Deke, this is terrible. Why do we eat here? Because I like the burgers and you like Al's strawberry shortcake. Oh, yes, she said, the strawberry shortcake. Bring it on. Mr. Amberson, can you stay for the football game? Not tonight, I said. I've got to get back to Dallas. Maybe next week's game, if you think you can use me? If Mimi likes you, I like you, Deke Simmons said. I can't guarantee you a day every week, but some weeks there'll be 2 or even 3. It'll all average out. I'm sure it will. The substitute salary isn't much. I'm afraid. I know that, sir. I'm just looking for a way to supplement my income. That Catcher book will never be in our library, Deke said with a regretful side glance at his purse-lipped paramour. School board won't have it. Mimi knows that. Another big bite of his prong burger. Times change, Mimi Corcoran said, pointing first to the napkin dispenser and then to the side of his mouth. Deke, sauce. The following week I made a mistake. I should have known better. Making another major wager should have been the last thing on my mind after all that had happened to me. You'll say I should have been more on my guard. I did understand the risk, but I was worried about money. I had come to Texas with something less than $16,000. Some was the remainder of Al's stake money, but most of it was the result of 2 very large bets, one placed in Derry and one in Tampa. But staying at the Adolphus for 7 weeks or so had eaten up over $1,000. Getting settled in a new town would easily cost another $400 or $500. Food, rent, and utilities aside, I was going to need a lot more clothes, and better ones, if I was going to look respectable in a classroom. I'd be based in Jody for 2.5 years before I could conclude my business with Lee Harvey Oswald. $14,000 or so wasn't going to cut it. The substitute teaching salary? $15.50 a day. Yeehaw. Okay, maybe I could have scraped through on 14 grand, plus 30 and sometimes even $50 a week as a sub, but I'd have to stay healthy and not have any accidents, and I couldn't bank on that, because the past is sly as well as obdurate. It fights back. And yes, maybe there was an element of greed involved too. If so, it was based less on the love of money than on the intoxicating knowledge that I could beat the usually unbeatable house whenever I wanted to. I think now, if Al had researched the stock market as thoroughly as who won all those baseball games, football games, and horse races, but he didn't. I think now, if Freddie Quinlan hadn't mentioned that the World Series was shaping up to be a doozy, but he did. And I went back to Greenville Avenue. I told myself that all those straw-hatted punters I'd seen standing out in front of Faith Financial, where trust is our watchword, would be betting the series, and some of them would be laying down serious cash. I told myself that I'd be one among many, and a middling bet from Mr. George Amberson, who'd claimed to be living in a nice converted garage duplex on Blackwell Street, right here in Dallas, should anyone inquire, would attract no attention. Hell, I told myself the guys running Faith Financial probably don't know Senor Eduardo Gutierrez of Tampa from Adam, or from Noah's son Ham, for that matter. Oh, I told myself lots of things, and they all boiled down to the same two things: that it was perfectly safe and that it was perfectly reasonable to want more money, even though I currently had enough to live on. Dumb, but stupidity is one of two things we see most clearly in retrospect. The other is missed chances. On September 28th, a week before the series was scheduled to start, I walked into Faith Financial and, after some dancing, put down $600 on the Pittsburgh Pirates to beat the Yankees in 7. I accepted 2-to-1 odds, which was outrageous considering how heavily favored the Yankees were. On the day after Bill Mazeroski hit his unlikely ninth-inning home run to seal the deal for the Buccos, I drove back to Dallas and Greenville Avenue. I think that if Faith Financial had been deserted, I would have turned around and driven right back to Jody, or maybe that's just what I tell myself now. I don't know for sure. What I do know is there was a queue of bettors waiting to collect, and I joined it. That group was a Martin Luther King dream come true. 50% black, 50% white, 100% happy. Most guys came out with nothing but a few fives or maybe a double sawbuck or two, but I saw several who were counting C notes. An armed robber who had chosen that day to hit Faith Financial would have done well indeed. The money man was a stocky fellow wearing a green eye shade. He asked me the standard first question. "Are you a cop? If you are, you have to show me your ID." And when I answered in the negative, he asked for my name and a look at my driver's license. It was a brand new one which I had received by registered mail the week before. Finally, a piece of Texas identification to add to my collection, and I was careful to hold my thumb over the Jody address. He paid me my $1,200. I stuffed it in my pocket and walked quickly to my car. When I was back on Highway 77 with Dallas falling behind and Jody growing closer with every turn of the wheels, I finally relaxed. Stupid me. We're going to take another leap forward in time. Narratives also contain rabbit holes when you stop to think of it. But I need to recount one more thing from 1960 first. Fort Worth, November 16th, 1960. Kennedy, the president-elect, for a little over a week. The corner of Ballinger and West 7th. The day was cold and overcast. Cars puffed white exhaust. The weatherman on K-Life, all the hits, all the time, was forecasting rain that might thicken to sleet by midnight. So be careful on the highways, all you rockers and rollers. I was bundled into a rawhide ranch coat. A felt cap with flaps was jammed down over my ears. I was sitting on a bench in front of the Texas Cattle Raisers Association looking down West 7th. I'd been there for almost an hour, and I didn't think the young man would visit with his mother much longer than that. According to Al Templeton's notes, all 3 of her boys had gotten away from her as soon as they possibly could. What I was hoping was that she might come out of her apartment building with him. She was recently back in the area after several months at Waco, where she had been working as a ladies' home companion. My patience was rewarded. The door of the Rotary Apartments opened, and a skinny man who bore an eerie resemblance to Lee Harvey Oswald came out. He held the door for a woman in a tartan car coat and blocky white nurse's shoes. She was only shoulder-high to him, but solidly built. Her graying hair was scooped back from a prematurely lined face. She wore a red kerchief. Matching lipstick outlined a small mouth that looked dissatisfied and pugnacious, the mouth of a woman who believes the world is against her and has had plenty of evidence over the years to prove it. Lee Oswald's elder brother went quickly down the concrete path. The woman scurried after and grabbed the back of his topcoat. He turned to her on the sidewalk. They appeared to argue, but the woman did most of the talking. She shook her finger in his face. No way I could tell what she was scolding him about. I was a prudent block and a half away. Then he started toward the corner of West 7th and Summit Avenue, as I had expected. He had come by bus, and that was where the nearest stop was. The woman stood where she was for a moment, as if undecided. "Come on, Mama," I thought. "You're not going to let him get away that easily, are you? He's just half a block down the street. Lee had to go all the way to Russia to get away from that wagging finger." She went after him, and as they neared the corner, she raised her voice, and I heard her clearly. "Stop! Robert, don't walk so fast. I'm not done with you." He looked over his shoulder but kept walking. She caught up to him at the bus stop and tugged on his sleeve until he looked at her. The finger resumed its tick-tock wagging. I caught isolated phrases. "You promised," and "gave you everything," and "I think, who are you to judge me?" I couldn't see Oswald's face because his back was to me, but his slumped shoulders said plenty. I doubted if this was the first time Mama had followed him down the street, jabbering away the whole time, oblivious of spectators. She spread a hand above the shelf of her bosom, that timeless mom gesture that says, "Behold me, ye thankless child." Oswald dug into his back pocket, produced his wallet, and gave her a bill. She stuffed it in her purse without looking at it and started back toward the Rotary Apartments. Then she thought of something else and turned to him once more. I heard her clearly, raised to shout across the 15 or 20 yards now between them. That reedy voice was like fingernails drawn down a slate blackboard. "And call me if you hear from Lee again, hear? I'm still on the party line. It's all I can afford until I get a better job, and that Sykes woman from downstairs is on it all the time. I spoke to her. I gave her a real piece of my mind. 'Mrs. Sykes,' I said." A man passed her. He stuck a theatrical finger in one ear, grinning. If Mama saw, she took no notice. She certainly took no notice of her son's grimace of embarrassment. "Mrs. Sykes," I said, "you're not the only one who needs the phone, so I'd thank you to keep your calls short. And if you won't do it on your own, I may have to call a representative of the telephone company to make you do it." That's what I said. "So you call me, Rob. You know I need to hear from Lee." Here came the bus. As it pulled up, he raised his voice to be heard over the chuff of the air brakes. "He's a damn commie, Ma, and he's not coming home. Get used to it." "You call me!" she shrilled. Her grim little face was set. She stood with her feet planted apart like a boxer ready to absorb a blow. Any blow. Every blow.
Her eyes glared from behind black-rimmed harlequin glasses. Her kerchief was double-knotted beneath her chin.
The rain had begun to fall now, but she paid it no mind. She drew in breath and raised her voice to something just short of a scream. I need to hear from my good boy. You hear?" Robert Oswald bolted up the steps and into the bus without replying. It pulled away in a chuff of blue exhaust, and as it did, a smile lit her face. It did something of which I would have thought a smile incapable. It made her simultaneously younger and uglier. A workman passed her. He didn't bump or even brush her as far as I could see, but she snapped, "Watch where you're going! You don't own the sidewalk!" Marguerite Oswald started back toward her apartment. When she turned away from me, she was still smiling. I drove back to Jody that afternoon shaken and thoughtful. I wouldn't see Lee Oswald for another year and a half, and I remained determined to stop him, but I already felt more sympathy for him than I ever had for Frank Dunning. Chapter 13. It was 7:45 on the evening of May 18th, 1961. The light of a long Texas dusk lay across my backyard. The window was open and the curtains fluttered in a mild breeze. On the radio, Troy Shondell was singing "This Time." I was sitting in what had been the little house's second bedroom and was now my study. The desk was a cast-off from the high school. It had one short leg, which I had shimmed. The typewriter was a Webster Portable. I was revising the first 150 or so pages of my novel, The Murder Place, mostly because Mimi Corcoran kept pestering me to read it, and Mimi, I had discovered, was the sort of person you could put off with excuses for only so long. The work was actually going well. I'd had no problem turning Derry into the fictional town of Dawson in my first draft, and turning Dawson into Dallas was even easier. I had started making the changes only so the work in progress would support my cover story when I finally let Mimi read it, but now the changes seemed both vital and inevitable. It seemed the book had wanted to be about Dallas all along. The doorbell rang. I put a paperweight on the manuscript pages so they wouldn't blow around and went to see who my visitor was. I remember all of this very clearly. The dancing curtains, the smooth river-stone paperweight, "This Time" playing on the radio, the long light of Texas evening, which I had come to love. I should remember it. It was when I stopped living in the past and just started living. I opened the door and Michael Kozloff stood there. He was weeping. "I can't, Mr. Amberson," he said. "I just can't." "Well, come in, Mike," I said. "Let's talk about it." I wasn't surprised to see him. I had been in charge of Lisbon High's little drama department for 5 years before running away to the era of universal smoking, and I'd seen plenty of stage fright in those years. Directing teenage actors is like juggling jars of nitroglycerin, exhilarating and dangerous. I've seen girls who were quick studies and beautifully natural in rehearsal freeze up completely on stage. I've seen nerdy little guys blossom and seem to grow a foot taller the first time they utter a line that gets a laugh from an audience. I've directed dedicated plodders and the occasional kid who showed a spark of talent, but I'd never had a kid like Mike Kozloff. I suspect there are high school and college faculty who've been working dramatics all their lives and never had a kid like him. Mimi Corcoran really did run Denholm Consolidated High School, and it was she who coaxed me into taking over the junior-senior play when Alfie Norton, the math teacher who'd been doing it for years, was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia and moved to Houston for treatments. I tried to refuse on the grounds that I was still doing research in Dallas, but I wasn't going there very much in the winter and early spring of 1961. Mimi knew it because whenever Deke needed an English sub during that half of the school year, I was usually available. When it came to Dallas, I was basically marking time. Lee was still in Minsk, soon to marry Marina Prusakova, the girl in the red dress and white shoes. "You've got plenty of time on your hands," Mimi had said. Her own hands were fisted on her non-existent hips. She was in full take-no-prisoners mode that day. "And it pays." "Oh, yeah," I said. I checked that out with Deke. $50. I'll be living large in the hood." "In the what?" "Never mind, Mimi. For the time being, I'm doing all right for cash. Can't we leave it at that?" No, we couldn't. Miss Mimi was a human bulldozer, and when she met a seemingly immovable object, she just lowered her blade and revved her engine higher. Without me, she said, there would be no junior-senior play for the first time in the high school's history. The parents would be disappointed. The school board would be disappointed. And, she added, drawing her brows together, I will be bereft. God forbid you should be bereft, Miss Mimi, I'd said. Tell you what, if you let me pick the play, something not too controversial, I promise, I'll do it. Her frown had disappeared into the brilliant Mimi Corcoran smile that always turned Deke Simmons into a simmering bowl of oatmeal, which, temperamentally speaking, was not a huge transformation. Excellent! Who knows, you may find a brilliant thespian lurking in our halls. Yes, I said, and pigs may whistle. But life is a joke. I had found a brilliant thesp, unnatural. And now he sat in my living room on the night before our show opened for the first of 4 performances, taking up almost the entire couch, which bowed humbly beneath his 270 pounds, bawling his freaking head off. Mike Coslaw, also known as Lenny Small in George Amberson's OK for High School adaptation of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. If that was, I could talk him into showing up tomorrow. I thought about handing him some Kleenex and decided they weren't up to the job. I fetched a dish wiper from the kitchen drawer instead. He scrubbed his face with it, got himself under some kind of control, then looked at me desolately. His eyes were red and raw. He hadn't started crying as he approached my door. This looked like it had been going on all afternoon. Okay, Mike, make me understand. Everybody on the team's making fun of me, Mr. Amberson. Coach started calling me Clark Gable. This was at the Lion Pride Spring Picnic, and now everybody's doing it. Even Jimmy's doing it. Meaning Jim Ledoux, the team's hot rod quarterback and Mike's best friend. I wasn't surprised about Coach Borman. He was a thud who preached the gospel of gung-ho and didn't like anyone poaching on his territory, either in season or out. And Mike had been called far worse. While hall monitoring, I'd heard him called Bohunk Mike, George of the Jungle, and Godzilla. He laughed the nicknames off. That amused, even absent-minded reaction to slurs and japes may be the greatest gift height and size conveys on large boys. And at 6'7" and 270, Mike made me look like Mickey Rooney. There was only one star on the Lions football team, and that was Jim Ledoux. Didn't he have his own billboard at the intersection of Highway 77 and Route 109? But if there was any player who made it possible for Jim to star, it was Mike Coslaw, who planned to sign with Texas A&M as soon as his senior high school season was over. Ledoux would be rolling with the Bama Crimson Tide, as both he and his father would be happy to tell you. But if someone had asked me to pick the one most likely to go pro, I would have put my money on Mike. I liked Jim, but to me, he looked like a knee injury or shoulder separation waiting to happen. Mike, on the other hand, seemed built for the long haul. What does Bobby Jill say? Mike and Bobby Jill Allnut were practically joined at the hip. Gorgeous girl? Check. Blonde? Check. Cheerleader? Why even ask? He grinned. Bobby Jill's behind me 1,000%. Says to man up and stop letting those other guys get my goat. Sounds like a sensible young lady. Yeah, she's the absolute best. Anyway, I suspect a little name-calling isn't what's really on your mind. And when he didn't reply, Mike, talk to me. I'm going to get up there in front of all those people and make a fool of myself. Jimmy told me so. Jimmy's a hell of a quarterback, and I know the two of you are pals. But when it comes to acting, he doesn't know jack shit." Mike blinked. In 1961, you usually didn't hear the word shit from teachers, even if they had a mouthful. But of course, I was only a substitute, and that freed me up some. "I think you know that. As they say in these parts, you may stagger, but you ain't stupid." "People think I am," he said in a low voice. "And I'm strictly a C student. Maybe you don't know that. Maybe subs don't get to see the records, but I am. I made it a point to see yours after the second week of rehearsals. When I saw what you could do on stage, you're a C student because as a football player, you're supposed to be a C student. It's part of the ethos." "The what?" "Figure it out from the context and save the dumb act for your friends. Not to mention Coach Borman, who probably has to tie a string on his whistle so he can remember which end to blow." Mike snickered at that, red eyes and all. "Listen to me. People automatically think anyone as big as you is stupid. Tell me different if you want to. According to what I hear, you've been walking around in that body since you were 12, so you should know." He didn't tell me different. What he said was, "Everybody on the team tried out for Lenny. It was a joke, a goof." He added hastily, "Nothing against you, Mr. A. Everybody on the team likes you. Even Coach likes you." A bunch of players had crashed the tryouts, intimidating the more scholarly aspirants into silence and all claiming they wanted to read for the part of George Milton's big, dumb friend. Of course it had been a joke, but Mike's reading of Lenny had been the farthest thing in the world from funny. What it had been was a goddamn revelation. I would have used an electric cattle prod to keep him in the room if that's what it took, but of course there was no need of such extreme measures. You want to know the best thing about teaching? Seeing that moment when a kid discovers his or her gift. There's no feeling on earth like it. Mike knew his teammates would make fun of him, but he took that part anyway. And of course Coach Borman didn't like it. The Coach Bormans of the world never do. In this case, however, there wasn't much he could do about it, especially with Mimi Corcoran on my side. He certainly couldn't claim he needed Mike for football practice in April and May, so he was reduced to calling his best lineman Clark Gable. There are guys who can't rid themselves of the idea that acting is for girls, and queers who sort of wish they were girls. Gavin Borman was that kind of guy. At Don Haggerty's annual April Fool's keg party, he had whined to me about putting ideas in that big galoot's head. I told him he was certainly welcome to his opinion. Like assholes, everybody had one. Then I walked away, leaving him with a paper cup in his hand and a perplexed look on his face. The Coach Bormans of the world are also used to getting their way through a kind of jocular intimidation, and he couldn't understand why it wasn't working on the lowly sub who'd stepped into Alfie Norton's director's shoes at the last minute. I could hardly tell Borman that shooting a guy to keep him from killing his wife and kids has a way of changing a man. Basically, Coach never had a chance. I cast some of the other football players as townspeople, but I meant to have Mike as Lenny from the moment he opened his mouth and said, "I remember about the rabbits, George." He became Lenny. He hijacked not just your eyes, because he was so damn big, but the heart and your chest. You forgot everything else, the way people forget their everyday cares when Jim Ledoux faded back to throw a pass. Mike might have been built to crash the opposing line in humble obscurity, but he had been made by God, if there is such a deity, by a roll of the genetic dice if there is not, to stand on a stage and disappear into someone else. "It was a goof for everyone but you," I said. "Oh, me too, at first." "Because at first you didn't know." "No, I didn't." Husky, almost whispering, he lowered his head because the tears were coming again, and he didn't want me to see them. The coach had called him Clark Gable, and if I called the man on it, he'd claim it was just a joke, a goof, a yuck, as if he didn't know the rest of the squad would pick up on it and pile on. As if he didn't know that shit would hurt Mike in a way being called Bohunk Mike never could. Why do people do that to gifted people? Is it jealousy? Fear? Both, maybe. But this kid had the advantage of knowing how good he was, and we both knew Coach Borman wasn't really the problem. The only person who could stop Mike from going on stage tomorrow night was Mike. You've played football in front of crowds 9 times bigger than the one that'll be in that auditorium. Hell, when you boys went down to Dallas for the regionals last November, you played in front of 10 or 12,000, and they were not friendly. Football's different. When we hit the field, we're all wearing the same uniform and helmets. Folks can only tell us apart by our numbers. Everybody's on the same side. There are 9 other people in this show with you, Mike. And that's not counting the townspeople I wrote in to give your football buddies something to do. They're a team too. It's not the same. Maybe not quite. But one thing is the same. If you let them down, the shit falls apart and everybody loses. The actors, the crew, the pep club girls who did the publicity, and all the people who are planning to come in for the show, some of them from ranches 50 miles out. Not to mention me. I lose too. I guess that's so, he said. He was looking at his feet, and mighty big feet they were. I could stand to lose Slim, or Curly. I'd just send someone out with a book to read the part. I guess I could even stand to lose Curly's wife. I wish Sandy was a little better, Mike said. She's pretty as hell, but if she ever hits her mark, it's an accident. I allowed myself a cautious inward smile. I was starting to think this was going to be all right. What I couldn't stand, what the show couldn't stand, is to lose you or Vince Knowles. Vince was playing Lenny's road buddy, George, and actually, we could have stood the loss if he'd gotten the flu or broken his neck in a road accident. Always a possibility, given the way he drove his daddy's farm truck. I would have gone on in Vince's place if push came to shove, even though I was much too big for the part. And I wouldn't need just to read either. After 6 weeks of rehearsals, I was as off the book as any of my actors, more than some. But I couldn't replace Mike. No one could replace him. With his unique combination of size and actual talent, he was the linchpin. What if I fuck up? He asked, then heard what he'd said and clapped a hand to his mouth. I sat down beside him on the couch. There wasn't much room, but I managed. Right then I wasn't thinking of John Kennedy, Al Templeton, Frank Dunning, or the world I'd come from. Right then I was thinking of nothing but this big boy and my show. Because at some point it had become mine. Just as this earlier time, with its party line telephones and cheap gas, had become mine. At that moment, I cared more about Of Mice and Men than I did about Lee Harvey Oswald. But I cared even more about Mike. I took his hand off his mouth, put it on one huge thigh, put my hands on his shoulders, looked into his eyes. Listen to me, I said. Are you listening? Yes, sir. You are not going to fuck up. Say it. Say it. I'm not going to fuck up. What you're going to do is amaze them. I promise you that, Mike. Gripping his shoulders tighter, it was like trying to sink my fingers into stones. He could have picked me up and broken me over his knee, but he only sat there looking at me from a pair of eyes that were humble, hopeful, and still rimmed with tears. Do you hear me? I promise. The stage was a beachhead of light. Beyond it was a lake of darkness where the audience sat. George and Lenny stood on the bank of an imaginary river. The other men had been sent away, but they wouldn't be gone long. If the big, vaguely smiling hulk of a man in the overalls were to die with any dignity, George would have to see to it himself. "George, where are them guys going?" Mimi Corcoran was sitting on my right. At some point, she had taken my hand and was gripping it hard, hard, hard. We were in the first row. Next to her, on her other side, Deke Simmons was staring up at the stage with his mouth slightly hung open. It was the expression of a farmer who sees a dinosaur cropping grass in his North 40. "Hunting. They're going hunting. Sit down, Lenny." Vince Knowles was never going to be an actor. What he was going to be most likely was a salesman at Jody Chrysler Dodge, like his father. But a great performance can lift all the actors in a production, and that had happened tonight. Vince, who in rehearsals had only once or twice achieved even low levels of believability, mostly because his ratty, intelligent little face was Steinbeck's George Milton, had caught something from Mike. All at once, about halfway through Act 1, he finally seemed to realize what it meant to go rambling through life with a Lenny as your only friend, and he'd fallen into the part. Now, watching him push an old felt hat from props back on his head, I thought that Vince looked like Henry Fonda in The Grapes of Wrath. "George?" "Yeah?" "Ain't you gonna give me hell?" "What do you mean?" "You know George." Smiling, the kind of smile that says, "Yeah, I know I'm a dope, but we both know I can't help it." Sitting down beside George on the imaginary river bank, taking off his own hat, tossing it aside, rumpling his short blonde hair, imitating George's voice. Mike had nailed this with eerie ease in the very first rehearsal, with no help from me. "If I was alone, I could live so easy. I could get a job and not have no more mess." Then resuming his own voice, or Lenny's, rather, "I can go away. I can go right up in the hills and find a cave. If you don't want me." Vince Knowles lowered his head, and when he raised it and spoke his next line, his voice was thick and hitching. It was a simulacrum of sorrow he'd never approached in even his best rehearsals. "No, Lenny, I want you to stay here with me." "Then tell me like you done before, about other guys, and about us." That was when I heard the first low sob from the audience. It was followed by another, and then a third. This I had not expected, not in my wildest dreams. A chill raced up my back, and I stole a glance at Mimi. She wasn't crying yet, but the liquid sheen in her eyes told me that she soon would be. Yes, even her, hard old baby that she was. George hesitated, then took hold of Lenny's hand, a thing Vince never would have done in rehearsals. "That's queer boy stuff," he would have said. "Guys like us, Lenny, guys like us got no families. They got nobody that gives a hoot in hell about them." Touching the prop gun hidden under his coat with his other hand, taking it part way out, putting then steeling himself and taking it all the way out, laying it along his leg. "But not us, George. Not us. Isn't that right?" Mike was gone. The stage was gone. Now it was only the two of them, and by the time Lenny was asking George to tell him about the little ranch and the rabbits and living off the fat of the land, half the audience was weeping audibly. Vince was crying so hard he could hardly deliver his final lines, telling poor, stupid Lenny to look over there. The ranch they were going to live on was over there. If he looked hard enough, he could see it. The stage lends slowly to full dark. Cindy McComas for once running the lights perfectly. Bertie Jameson, the school janitor, fired a blank cartridge. Some woman in the audience gave a little scream. That sort of reaction is usually followed by nervous laughter, but tonight there was only the sound of people weeping in their seats. Otherwise, silence. It went on for 10 seconds. Or maybe it was only 5. Whatever it was, to me, it seemed forever. Then the applause broke. It was the best thunder I ever heard in my life. The house lights went up. The entire audience was on its feet. The front 2 rows were reserved for faculty. And I happened to glance at Coach Borman. Damned if he wasn't crying too. 2 rows back, where all the school jocks were sitting together, Jim Ledoux leaped to his feet. "You rock, Kozlaw!" he shouted. This elicited cheers and laughter. The cast came out to take their bows. First the football player townspeople, then Curly and Curly's wife, then Candy and Slim and the rest of the farmhands. The applause started to die a little, and then Vince came out, flushed and happy, his own cheeks still wet. Mike Kozlaw came last, shuffling as if embarrassed, then looking out in comical amazement as Mimi shouted, "Bravo!" Others echoed it, and soon the auditorium resounded with it. "Bravo! Bravo! Bravo!" Mike bowed, sweeping his hat so low it brushed the stage. When he stood again, he was smiling, but it was more than a smile. His face was transformed with the happiness that's reserved for those who are finally allowed to reach all the way up. Then he shouted, "Mr. Amberson! Come up here, Mr. Amberson!" The cast took up the chant of, "Director! Director!" "Don't kill the applause," Mimi growled from beside me. "Get up there, you goofball!" So I did, and the applause swelled again. Mike grabbed me, hugged me, lifted me off my feet, then set me down and gave me a hearty smack on the cheek. Everyone laughed, including me. We all grabbed hands, lifted them to the audience, and bowed. As I listened to the applause, a thought occurred to me, one that darkened my heart. In Minsk, there were newlyweds. Lee and Marina had been man and wife for exactly 19 days. 3 weeks later, just before school let out for the summer, I went to Dallas to take some photographs of the 3 apartments where Lee and Marina would live together. I used a small Minox, holding it in the palm of my hand and allowing the lens to peep out between 2 spread fingers. I felt ridiculous, more like the trench-coated caricatures in Mad Magazine's Spy vs. Spy feature than James Bond, but I had learned to be careful about such things. When I returned to my house, Mimi Corcoran's sky-blue Nash Rambler was parked at the curb, and Mimi was just sliding in behind the wheel. When she saw me, she got out again. A brief grimace tightened her face. Pain or effort. But when she came up the drive, she was wearing her usual dry smile, as if I amused her, but in a good way. In her hand, she was carrying a bulky manila envelope which contained the 150 pages of The Murder Place. I'd finally given in to her pesterings, but that had been only the day before. "Either you liked it one hell of a lot or you never got past page 10, I said, taking the envelope. "Which was it?" Her smile now looked enigmatic as well as amused. "Like most librarians, I'm a fast reader. Can we go inside and talk about it? It isn't even the middle of June, and it's already so hot." Yes, and she was sweating, something I'd never seen before. Also, she looked as if she'd lost weight. Not a good thing for a lady who had no pounds to give away. Sitting in my living room with big glasses of iced coffee, me in the easy chair, she on the couch, Mimi gave her opinion. "I enjoyed the stuff about the killer dressed up as a clown. Call me twisted, but I found that deliciously creepy." "If you're twisted, I am too." She smiled. "I'm sure you'll find a publisher for it. On the whole, I liked it very much." I felt a little hurt. The Murder Place might have begun as camouflage, but it had become more important to me as I got deeper into it. It was like a secret memoir. One of the nerves. That on the whole stuff reminds me of Alexander Pope, damning with faint praise. I didn't quite mean it that way. More qualification. It's just that, God damn it, George, this isn't what you were meant to do. You were meant to teach. And if you publish a book like this, no school department in the United States will hire you. She paused, except maybe in Massachusetts. I didn't reply. I was speechless. What you did with Mike Coslaw, what you did for Mike Coslaw, was the most amazing and wonderful thing I've ever seen. Mimi, it wasn't me. He's just naturally talented. I know he's naturally talented. That was obvious from the moment he walked on stage and opened his mouth. But I'll tell you something, my friend. Something 40 years in high schools and 60 years of living has taught me, and taught me well. Artistic talent is far more common than the talent to nurture artistic talent. Any parent with a hard hand can crush it, but to nurture it is much more difficult. That's a talent you have, and in much greater supply than the one that drove this. She tapped the sheaf of pages on the coffee table in front of her. I don't know what to say. Say thank you and compliment me on my acute judgment. Thanks. And your insight is only exceeded by your good looks. That brought the smile back, drier than ever. Don't exceed your brief, George. Yes, Miss Mimi. The smile disappeared. She leaned forward. The blue eyes behind her glasses were too big, swimming in her face. The skin under her tan was yellowish, and her formerly taut cheeks were hollow. When had this happened? Had Deke noticed? But this was ridic, as the kids said. Deke wouldn't notice that his socks were mismatched until he took them off at night. Probably not even then. She said, Phil Bateman is no longer just threatening to retire. He's done pulled the pin and tossed the grenade, as our delightful Coach Borman would say, which means there's a vacancy on the English faculty. Come and teach full-time at DCHS, George. The kids like you. And after the junior-senior play, the community thinks you're the second coming of Alfred Hitchcock. Deke is just waiting to see your application. He told me so just last night. Please, publish this under a pseudonym if you have to, but come and teach. That's what you were meant to do. I wanted badly to say yes because she was right. My job wasn't writing books, and it certainly wasn't killing people, no matter how much they deserved killing. And there was Jody. I'd come to it as a stranger who'd been displaced from his home era as well as his hometown, and the first words spoken to me here by Al Stevens at the diner had been friendly words. If you've ever been homesick or felt exiled from all the things and people that once defined you, you'll know how important welcoming words and friendly smiles can be. Jody was the anti-Dallas, and now one of its leading citizens was asking me to be a resident instead of a visitor. But the watershed moment was approaching, only it wasn't here yet. Maybe. George, you have the most peculiar look on your face. That's called thinking. Will you let me do it, please? She put her hands to her cheeks and rounded her mouth in a comic "oh" of apology. Well, braid my hair and call me Buckwheat. I paid no attention because I was busy flicking through Al's notes. I no longer had to look at them to do that. When the new school year started in September, Oswald was still going to be in Russia, although he had already started what would be a lengthy paperwork battle to get back to America with his wife and daughter, June, with whom Marina would be pregnant any day now. It was a battle Oswald would eventually win, playing one superpower bureaucracy off against the other with instinctive if rudimentary cleverness. But they wouldn't step off the SS Mazdam and onto American soil until the middle of the next year. And as for Texas, Memes, the school year usually ends the first week in June, doesn't it? Always. The kids who need summer jobs have to nail them down. As for Texas, the Oswalds were going to arrive on the 14th of June, 1962. And any teaching contract I signed would be probationary, right, as in 1 year? with an option to renew if all parties are satisfied, yes. Then you've got yourself a probationary English teacher. She laughed, clapped her hands, got to her feet, and held her arms out. Marvelous! Huggies for Miss Mimi! I hugged her, then released her quickly when I heard her gasp. What the hell is wrong with you, ma'am? She went back to the couch, picked up her iced coffee, and sipped. Let me give you 2 pieces of advice, George. The first is never call a Texas woman ma'am if you come from the northern climes. It sounds sarcastic. The second is never ask any woman what the hell is wrong with her. Try something slightly more delicate, like, are you feeling quite all right? Are you? Why wouldn't I? I'm getting married. At first I couldn't match this particular zig with a corresponding zag, except the grave look in her eyes suggested she wasn't zigging at all. She was circling something. Probably not a nice something either. Say, congratulations, Miss Mimi. Congratulations, Miss Mimi. Deke first popped the question almost a year ago. I put him off, saying it was too soon after his wife died and it would cause talk. As time passes, that has become less effective as an argument. I doubt if there would have been all that much talk anyway, given our ages. People in small towns realize that folks like Deke and me can't afford the luxury of decorum quite so much once we reach a certain, shall we say, plateau of maturity. Truth is, I liked things fine just the way they were. The old fellow loves me quite a lot more than I love him, but I like him plenty. And at the risk of embarrassing you, even ladies who've reached a certain plateau of maturity aren't adverse to a nice boink on a Saturday night. Am I embarrassing you? No, I said. Actually, you're delighting me. The dry smile. Lovely. Because when I swing my feet out of bed in the morning, my first thought as they hit the floor is, might there be a way I can delight George Amberson today? And if so, how shall I go about it? Don't exceed your brief, Miss Mimi. Spoken like a man. She sipped her iced coffee. I had 2 objectives when I came here today. I've accomplished the first. Now I'll move on to the second so you can get on with your day. Deke and I are going to be married on July 21st, which is a Friday. The ceremony will be a small, private affair in his home, just us, the preacher, and a few family members. His parents, they're quite vigorous for dinosaurs, are coming from Alabama, and my sister from San Diego. The reception will be a lawn party at my house the following day, 2 p.m. until drunk o'clock. We're inviting almost everyone in town. There's going to be a piñata and lemonade for the little kiddies, barbecue and kegs of beer for the big kiddies, and even a band from San Antone. Unlike most bands from San Antone, I believe they are able to play Louie Louie as well as La Paloma. If you don't favor us with your presence, you'll be bereft. Indeed I will. Will you save the date? Absolutely. Good. Deke and I'll be leaving for Mexico on Sunday, by which time his hangover will have dissipated. We're a little old for a honeymoon, but there are certain resources available south of the border that are not available in the six-gun state. Certain experimental treatments. I doubt if they work, but Deke is hopeful, and hell, it's worth a try. Life, she gave a rueful sigh. Life is too sweet to give up without a fight, don't you think? Yes, I said. Yes. So, one holds on. She looked at me closely. Are you going to cry, George? No. Good, because that would embarrass me. I might even cry myself, and I don't do it well. No one would ever write a poem about my tears. I croak. How bad is it, may I ask? Quite bad. She said it offhandedly. I might have 8 months, possibly a year, assuming the herbal treatments or peach pits or whatever down Mexico way don't affect a magical cure, that is. I'm very sorry to hear it. Thank you, George, expressed to a nicety. Any more would be sloppy. I smiled. I have another reason for inviting you to our reception, although it goes without saying that your charming company and sparkling repartee would be enough. Phil Bateman isn't the only one who's retiring. Mimi, don't do that. Take a leave of absence if you have to, but... She shook her head decisively. Sick or well, 40 years is enough. It's time for younger hands, younger eyes, and a younger mind. On my recommendation, Deke has hired a well-qualified young lady from Georgia. Her name is Sadie Clayton. She'll be at the reception. She'll know absolutely no one, and I expect you to be especially nice to her. Mrs. Clayton? I wouldn't quite say that. Mimi looked at me guilelessly. I believe she intends to reclaim her maiden name at some point in the near future, following certain legal formalities. Mimi, are you matchmaking? Not at all, she said, then snickered. Hardly at all, although you will be the only teacher on the English faculty who's currently unattached, and that makes you a natural to act as her mentor. I thought that a gigantic leap into illogic, especially for such an ordered mind, but I accompanied her to the door without saying so. What I said was, if it's as serious as you say, you should be seeking treatment now, and not from some quack doctor in Juarez either. You should be at the Cleveland Clinic. I didn't know if the Cleveland Clinic even existed yet, but just then I didn't care. I think not. Given the choice between dying in a hospital room somewhere, stuck full of tubes and wires, and dying in a seaside Mexican hacienda, that is, as you like to say, a no-brainer. And there's something else as well. She looked at me unflinchingly. The pain isn't too bad yet, but I'm told it will be. In Mexico, they are far less apt to strike moral poses about large doses of morphine, or Nembutal if it comes to that. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Based on what had happened to Al Templeton, I guessed that was true. I put my arms around her, this time hugging very gently. I kissed one leathery cheek. She bore it with a smile, then slipped away. Her eyes searched my face. I'd like to know your story, my friend. I shrugged. I'm an open book, Miss Mimi. She laughed. What a crock of shit. You say you're from Wisconsin, but you showed up in Jody with a New England drawl in your mouth and Florida plates on your auto. You say you're commuting to Dallas for research purposes, and your manuscript purports to be about Dallas, but the people in it speak like New Englanders. In fact, there are a couple of places where characters actually say, "ayah." You might want to change those. And I thought my rewrite had been so clever. Actually, Mimi, New Englanders say "ayah," not "ayah." Noted. She continued to search my face. It was a struggle not to drop my eyes, but I managed. Sometimes I've actually caught myself wondering if you might not be a space alien, like Michael Rennie in The Day the Earth Stood Still, here to analyze the natives and report back to Alpha Centauri on whether there's still hope for us as a species, or if we should be exploded by plasma rays before we can spread our germs to the rest of the galaxy. That's very fanciful, I said, smiling. Good. I'd hate to think our whole planet was being judged by Texas. If Jody were used as a sample, I'm sure Earth would get a passing grade. You like it here, don't you? Yes. Is George Amberson your real name? No. I changed it for reasons that are important to me but wouldn't be to anyone else. I'd prefer you kept that to yourself, for obvious reasons. She nodded. I can do that. I'll see you around, George. The diner, the library, and at the party, of course. You'll be nice to Sadie Clayton, won't you? Nice as pie, I said. That made her laugh. When she was gone, I sat in my living room for a long time, not reading, not watching TV, and working on either of my manuscripts was the farthest thing from my mind. I thought about the job I'd just agreed to, a year of teaching full-time English at Denholm Consolidated High School, home of the Lions. I decided I had no regrets. I could roar at halftime with the best of them. Well, I did have one regret, but it wasn't for me. When I thought about Mimi and her current situation, I had regrets aplenty. On the subject of love at first sight, I'm with the Beatles. I believe that it happens all the time. But it didn't happen that way for me and Sadie, although I held her the first time I met her, and with my right hand cupping her left breast. So I guess I'm also with Mickey and Sylvia, who said love is strange. South Central Texas can be savagely hot in mid-July, but the Saturday of the post-wedding party was damn near perfect, with temperatures in the upper 70s and lots of fat white clouds hustling across a sky the color of faded overalls. Long shutters of sun and shadow slipped down Mimi's backyard, which was on a mild slope ending at a muddy trickle of water she called Nameless Crick. There were streamers of yellow and silver, Denholm High colors, strung from the trees, and there was indeed a piñata hung temptingly low from the jutting branch of a sugar pine. No child passed near it without giving it a longing glance. "After dinner the kids'll get sticks and beat away on it," someone said from just behind my left shoulder. "Candy and toys for all de niños." I turned and beheld Mike Coslaw, resplendent and a little hallucinatory, in tight black jeans and a white open-throated shirt. A sombrero on a tug string hung down on his back, and he wore a multicolored sash around his waist. I saw a number of other football players, including Jim Ledoux, dressed in the same semi-ridiculous manner, circulating with trays. Mike held his out with a slightly crooked smile. "Canapé, Signor Amberson?" I took a baby shrimp on a toothpick and dipped it in the sauce. "Nice get-up, kind of a Speedy Gonzales thing." "Don't start. If you want to see a real get-up, check Vince Knowles." He pointed beyond the net to where a group of teachers was playing a clumsy but enthusiastic game of volleyball. I beheld Vince dressed up in tails and a top hat. He was surrounded by fascinated children who were watching him pull scarves out of thin air. It worked well, if you were still young enough to miss the one poking out of his sleeve. His shoe-polish mustache gleamed in the sun. "On the whole, I prefer the Cisco Kid look," Mike said. "I'm sure you all make terrific waiters, but who in God's name persuaded you to dress up? And does Coach know?" "He ought to. He's here." "Oh, I haven't seen him." "He's over by the barbecue pit getting hammered with the Boosters Club." As for the outfit, Ms. Mimi can be pretty persuasive. I thought of the contract I'd signed. "I know." Mike lowered his voice. "We all know she's sick. Besides, I think of this as acting." He struck a bullfighter pose, not easy when you're carrying a tray of canapés. "Arriba!" "Not bad, but I know I'm not really inside the part yet. Gotta submerge myself, right?" It works for Brando. How are you guys going to be this fall, Mike? Senior year? Jim in the pocket, me, Hank Alvarez, Chip Wiggins, and Carl Crockett on the line. We're going to state, and that gold ball's going into the trophy case. I like your attitude. Are you going to do a play this fall, Mr. Amberson? That's the plan. Good. Great. Save me a part. But with football, it'll have to be a small one. Check out the band. They're not bad. The band was a lot better than not bad. The logo on the snare drum proclaimed them the Knights. The teenage lead singer counted off, and the band launched into a hot version of Ooh My Head, the old Ritchie Valens song, and not really so old in the summer of '61, although Valens had been dead for almost 2 years. I got my beer in a paper cup and walked closer to the bandstand. The kid's voice was familiar. So was the keyboard, which sounded like it desperately wanted to be an accordion. And suddenly it clicked. The kid was Doug Somm. And not so many years from now, he would have hits of his own. She's About a Mover, for one. Mendocino, for another. That would be during the British invasion, so the band, which basically played Tejano rock, would take a pseudo-British name, the Sir Douglas Quintet. "George, come here and meet someone, would you?" I turned. Mimi was coming down the slope of the lawn with a woman in tow. My first impression of Sadie? Everyone's first impression, I have no doubt, was her height. She was wearing flats, as were most of the women here, knowing that they'd be spending the afternoon and evening traipsing around outside. But this was a woman who had probably last worn heels to her own wedding, and even for that occasion she might have picked a dress that would hide just one more pair of low or no heels, chosen so she wouldn't tower comically over the groom as they stood at the altar. She was 6 feet at least, maybe a little more. I still had her by at least 3 inches, but other than Coach Borman and Greg Underwood of the history department, I was probably the only man at the party who did. And Greg was a beanpole. Sadie had, in the argot of the day, a really good build. She knew it and was self-conscious about it rather than proud. I could tell that from the way she walked. "I know I'm a little too big to be considered normal," that walk said. The set of her shoulders said more. "It's not my fault. I just growed that way, like Topsy." She was wearing a sleeveless dress printed over with roses. Her arms were tanned. She had dashed on a little pink lipstick, but no other makeup. Not love at first sight, I'm pretty sure of it, but I remember that first sight with surprising clarity. If I told you I remember with similar clarity the first time I saw the former Christy Epping, I'd be lying. Of course, it was at a dance club, and we were both toasted, so maybe I get a pass on that. Sadie was good-looking in an artless, what-you-see-is-what-you-get American girl way. She was something else as well. On the day of the party, I thought that something else was plain old big-person clumsiness. Later, I found out she wasn't clumsy at all, was in fact the farthest thing from it. Mimi looked good, or at least no worse than she had on the day she'd come to my house and convinced me to teach full-time, but she was wearing makeup, which was unusual. It didn't quite conceal the hollows under her eyes, probably caused by a combination of sleeplessness and pain, or the new lines at the corners of her mouth. But she was smiling, and why not? She had married her fella, she'd thrown a party that was obviously a roaring success, and she had brought a pretty girl in a pretty summer dress to meet the school's only eligible English teacher. "Hey, Mimi," I said, starting up the mild slope toward her, weaving my way around the card tables, borrowed from the AmVets Hall, where people would later sit to eat barbecue and watch the sunset. "Congratulations! I guess now I'll have to get used to calling you Ms. Simmons?" She smiled her dry smile. "Please stick to Mimi. It's what I'm used to. I have a new faculty member I want you to meet. This is—" Someone had neglected to push one of the folding chairs all the way back in, and the big blonde girl, already holding her hand out to me and composing her "how nice to meet you" smile, tripped over it and went spilling forward. The chair came with her, tipping up, and I saw the potential for a nasty accident if one of the legs speared her in the stomach. I dropped my cup of beer in the grass, took a giant step forward, and grabbed her as she fell. My left arm went around her waist. My right hand landed higher, grabbing something warm and round and slightly yielding. Between my hand and her breast, the cotton of her dress slipped over the smooth nylon or silk of whatever she was wearing beneath. It was an intimate introduction, but we had the banging angles of the chair for a chaperone, and although I staggered a little against the momentum of her 150 or so pounds, I kept my feet, and she kept hers. I took my hand away from the part of her that is rarely grasped when strangers are introduced, and said, "Hello, I'm Jake." I came within a hair of giving my 21st century name, but caught it at the very last moment. "I'm George. How nice to make your acquaintance." She was blushing to the roots of her hair. I probably was too, but she had the good grace to laugh.
Nice to make yours. I think you just saved me from a very nasty accident." Probably I had, because that was it, you see. Sadie wasn't clumsy. She was accident-prone. It was amusing until you realized what it really was, a kind of haunting. She was the girl, she told me later, who got the hem of her dress caught in a car door when she and her date arrived at the senior prom and managed to tear her skirt right off as they headed for the gym. She was the woman around whom water fountains malfunctioned, giving her a faceful. The woman who was apt to set an entire book of matches on fire when she lit a cigarette, burning her fingers or singeing her hair. The woman whose bra strap broke during parents' night, or who discovered huge runs in her stockings before school assemblies at which she was scheduled to speak. She was careful to mind her head going through doors, as all sensible tall folks learned to be. But people had a tendency to open them incautiously in her face just as she was approaching them. She'd been stuck in elevators on 3 occasions, once for 2 hours. And the year before, in a Savannah department store, the recently installed escalator had gobbled one of her shoes. Of course, I knew none of this then. All I knew on that July afternoon was that a good-looking woman with blonde hair and blue eyes had fallen into my arms. "I see you and Miss Dunhill are already getting along famously," Mimi said. "I'll leave you to get to know one another." So, I thought, the change from Mrs. Clayton to Miss Dunhill had already been effected, legal formalities or not. Meanwhile, the chair was stuck into the sod by one leg. When Sadie tried to tug it free, it wouldn't come at first. When it did, the back of the chair ran nimbly up her thigh, hiking her skirt and revealing one stocking top all the way to the garter, which was as pink as the roses on her dress. She gave a little cry of exasperation. Her blush darkened to an alarming shade of firebrick. I took the chair and set it firmly aside. "Miss Dunhill, Sadie, if I ever saw a woman who could use a cold beer, that woman is you. Come with me." "Thank you," she said. "I'm so sorry. My mother told me never to throw myself at men, but I've never learned." As I led her toward the line of kegs, pointing out various faculty members along the way and taking her arm to steer her around a volleyball player who looked like he was going to collide with her as he backpedaled to return a high lob, I felt sure of one thing. We could be colleagues, and we could be friends, maybe good friends, but we'd never be any more than that, no matter what Mimi might hope for. In a comedy starring Rock Hudson and Doris Day, our introduction would have undoubtedly qualified as meet cute. But in real life, in front of an audience that was still grinning, it was just awkward and embarrassing. Yes, she was pretty. Yes, it was very nice to be walking with such a tall girl and still be taller. And sure, I had enjoyed the yielding firmness of that breast, cupped inside its thin double layer of proper cotton and sexy nylon. But unless you're 15, an accidental grope at a lawn party does not qualify as love at first sight. I got the newly minted or reminted Miss Dunhill a beer, and we stood conversing near the makeshift bar for the requisite amount of time. We laughed when the dove Vince Knowles had rented for the occasion poked its head out of his top hat and pecked his finger. I pointed out more Denholm educators, many already leaving Sobriety City on the Alcohol Express. She said she would never get to know them all, and I assured her she would. I asked her to call on me if she needed help with anything. The requisite number of minutes, the expected conversational gambits. Then she thanked me again for saving her from a nasty fall, and went to see if she could help gather the kids into the piñata-bashing mob they would soon become. I watched her go, not in love, but a little in lust. I'll admit I mused briefly on the stocking top and the pink garter. My thoughts returned to her that night as I got ready for bed. She filled a large amount of space in a very nice way, and my eye hadn't been the only one following the pleasant sway of her progress in the print dress, but really, that was it. What more could there be? I'd read a book called A Reliable Wife not too long before leaving on the world's strangest trip, and as I climbed into bed, a line from the novel crossed my mind. He had lost the habit of romance. That's me, I thought as I turned out the light. Totally out of the habit. And then as the crickets sang me to sleep, but it wasn't just the breast that was nice, it was the weight of her in my arms. As it turned out, I hadn't lost the habit of romance at all. August in Jody was an oven, with temperatures at least in the 90s every day and often breaking 100. The air conditioning in my rented house on Mesa Lane was good, but not good enough to withstand that sort of sustained assault. Sometimes, if there was a cooling shower, the nights were a little better, but not by much. I was at my desk on the morning of August 27th, working away at the murder place in a pair of basketball shorts and nothing else when the doorbell rang. I frowned. It was Sunday. I'd heard the sound of competing church bells not too long previous, and most of the people I knew attended one of the town's 4 or 5 places of worship. I pulled on a T-shirt and went to the door. Coach Borman was standing there with Ellen Dougherty, the former head of the home ec department and DCHS's acting principal for the coming year. To no one's surprise, Deke had tendered his resignation on the same day Mimi tendered hers. Coach was stuffed into a dark blue suit and a loud tie that looked like it was strangling his plug of a neck. Ellen was wearing a prim gray outfit relieved by a spray of lace at her throat. They looked solemn. My first thought, as persuasive as it was wild, they know. Somehow they know who I am and where I came from. They're here to tell me. Coach Borman's lips were trembling, and although Ellen didn't sob, tears filled her eyes. Then I knew. Is it Mimi? Coach nodded. Deke called me. I got Ellie. I usually take her to church, and we're letting people know. The one she liked the best. I'm sorry to hear, I said. How's Deke? He seems to be bearing up, Ellen said, then glanced at Coach with some asperity. According to him, at least. Yeah, he's okay, Coach said. Broken up, of course. Sure he is. He's going to have her cremated. Ellen's lips thinned in disapproval. Said it was what she wanted. I thought about it. We should have some sort of special assembly once school's back in. Can we do that? People can speak. Maybe we could put together a slideshow. People must have lots of pictures of her. That's a wonderful idea, Ellen said. Could you organize it, George? I'd be happy to try. Get Miss Dunhill to help you. And before the suspicion of more matchmaking could even begin to cross my mind, she added, I think it will help the boys and girls who loved memes to know her hand-picked replacement helped plan the memorial assembly. It will help Sadie, too. Of course it would. As a newcomer, she could use a little banked goodwill to start the year with. Okay, I'll talk to her. Thank you both. Are you going to be okay? Sure, Coach said stoutly, but his lips were still trembling. I liked him for that. They went slowly down to his car, which was parked at the curb. Coach had his hand on Ellen's elbow. I liked him for that, too. I closed the door, sat down on the bench in the little dab of front hall, and thought about Mimi saying she would be bereft if I didn't take over the junior-senior play, and if I didn't sign on to teach full-time for at least a year. Also, if I didn't come to her wedding party. Mimi, who thought Catcher in the Rye belonged in the school library, and who wasn't averse to a nice boink on Saturday night. She was one of those faculty members the kids remember long after graduation and sometimes come back to visit when they're no longer kids. The kind who sometimes shows up in a troubled student's life at a critical moment and makes a critical difference. Who can find a virtuous woman? The proverb asks. For her price is above rubies. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands.
She is like the merchant ships that bringeth food from afar. There are more clothes than the ones you put on your body. Every teacher knows that. And food isn't just what you put in your mouth. Miss Mimi had fed and clothed many, including me. I sat there on a bench I'd bought at a Fort Worth flea market with my head lowered and my face in my hands. I thought about her, and I was very sad. But my eyes remained dry. I've never been what you'd call a crying man. Sadie immediately agreed to help me put together a memorial assembly. We worked on it for the last 2 weeks of that hot August, driving around town to line up speakers. I tapped Mike Kozlaw to read Proverbs 31, which describes the virtuous woman, and Al Stevens volunteered to tell the story, which I'd never heard from Mimi herself, about how she had named the prong burger his spécialité de la maison. We also collected over 200 photographs. My favorite showed Mimi and Deke doing the twist at a school dance. She looked like she was having fun. He looked like a man with a fair-sized stick up his ass. We culled the photos in the school library, where the nameplate on the desk now read Miss Dunhill instead of Ms. Mimi. During that time, Sadie and I never kissed, never held hands, never even looked into each other's eyes for longer than a passing glance. She didn't talk about her busted marriage or her reasons for coming to Texas from Georgia. I didn't talk about my novel or tell her about my largely made-up past. We talked about books. We talked about Kennedy, whose foreign policy she considered jingoistic. We discussed the nascent civil rights movement. I told her about the board across the creek at the bottom of the path behind the Humble oil station in North Carolina. She said she'd seen similar toilet facilities for colored people in Georgia, but believed their days were numbered. She thought school integration would come, but probably not until the mid-'70s. I told her I thought it would be sooner, driven by the new president and his attorney general kid brother. She snorted, "You have more respect for that grinning Irishman than I do. Tell me, does he ever get his hair cut?" We didn't become lovers, but we became friends. Sometimes she tripped over things, including her own feet, which were large, and on 2 occasions I steadied her. But there were no catches as memorable as the first one. Sometimes she'd declare she just had to have a cigarette, and I'd accompany her out to the student smoking area behind the metal shop. "I'll be sorry not to be able to come out here and sprawl on the bench in my old blue jeans," she said one day. This was less than a week before school was scheduled to start. There's always such a fug in teachers' rooms. Someday that'll all change. Smoking will be banned on school grounds for teachers as well as students. She smiled. It was a good one because her lips were rich and full, and the jeans, I must say, looked good on her. She had long, long legs, not to mention just enough junk in her trunk. A cigarette-free society? Negro children and white children studying side by side in perfect harmony? No wonder you're writing a novel. You've got one hell of an imagination. What else do you see in your crystal ball, George? Rockets to the moon? Sure, but it'll probably take a little longer than integration. Who told you I was writing a novel? Ms. Mamie, she said, and butted her cigarette in one of the 6 sand urn ashtrays. She said it was good. And speaking of Ms. Mamie, I suppose we ought to get back to work. I think we're almost there with the photographs, don't you? Yes. And are you sure playing that West Side Story song over the slideshow isn't going to be too corny? I thought Somewhere was cornier than Iowa and Nebraska put together, but according to Ellen Doherty, it had been Mimi's favorite song. I told Sadie this, and she laughed doubtfully. I didn't know her all that well, but it sure doesn't seem like her. Maybe it's Ellie's favorite song. Now that I think about it, that seems all too likely. Listen, Sadie,
do you want to go to the football game with me on Friday? Kind of show the kids that you're here before school starts on Monday?" "I'd love to." Then she paused, looking a little uncomfortable. "As long as you don't, get any ideas. I'm not ready to date just yet. Maybe not for a long time." "Neither am I." She was probably thinking about her ex. But I was thinking about Lee Oswald. Soon he'd have his American passport back. Then it would only be a matter of wrangling a Soviet exit visa for his wife. "But friends sometimes go to the game together." "That's right, they do. And I like going places with you, George." "Because I'm taller." She punched my arm playfully, a big sister kind of punch. "That's right, partner. You're the kind of man I can look up to." At the game, practically everybody looked up to us, and with faint awe, as though we were representatives of a slightly different race of humans. I thought it was kind of nice, and for once Sadie didn't have to slouch to fit in. She wore a Lion Pride sweater and her faded jeans. With her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, she looked like a high school senior herself, a tall one, probably the center on the girls' basketball team. We sat in faculty row and cheered as Jim Ledoux riddled the Arnett Bears' defense with half a dozen short passes and then a 60-yard bomb that brought the crowd to its feet. At halftime, the score was Denholm 31, Arnett 6. As the players ran off the field and the Denholm band marched onto it with their tubas and trombones wagging, I asked Sadie if she wanted a hot dog and a Coke. "You bet I do, but right now the line will be all the way out to the parking lot. Wait until there's a timeout in the third quarter or something. We have to roar like lions and do the gym cheer." "I think you can manage those things on your own." She smiled at me and gripped my arm. "No, I need you to help me. I'm new here, remember?" At her touch, I felt a warm little shiver I did not associate with friendship. And why not? Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes were sparkling. Under the lights and the greeny blue sky of a deepening Texas dusk, she was way beyond pretty. Things between us might have progressed faster than they did, except for what happened during that halftime. The band marched around the way high school bands do, in step but not completely in tune, blaring a medley you couldn't quite figure out. When they finished, the cheerleaders trotted to the 50-yard line, dropped their pom-poms in front of their feet, and put their hands on their hips. "Give us an L!" We gave them what they required, and when further importuned, we obliged with an I, an O, an N, and an S. "What's that spell?" "Lions!" Everybody on the home bleachers up and clapping. "Who's gonna win?" "Lions!" Given the halftime score, there wasn't much doubt about it. "Then let us hear you roar!" We roared in the traditional manner, turning first to the left and then to the right. Sadie gave it her all, cupping her hands around her mouth, her ponytail flying from one shoulder to the other. What came next was the gym cheer. In the previous 3 years, yes, our Mr. Ledoux had started at QB even as a freshman. This had been pretty simple. The cheerleaders would yell something like, "Let us hear your lion pride. Name the man who leads our side." And the hometown crowd would bellow, "Jim! Jim! Jim!" After that, the cheerleaders would do a few more cartwheels and then run off the field so the other team's band could march out and tootle a tune or two. But this year, possibly in honor of Jim's valedictory season, the chant had changed. Each time the crowd yelled, "Jim!" the cheerleaders responded with the first syllable of his last name, drawing it out like a teasing musical note. It was new, but it wasn't complicated, and the crowd caught on in a hurry. Sadie was doing the chant with the best of them until she realized I wasn't. I was just standing there with my mouth open. "George, are you okay?" I couldn't answer. In fact, I barely heard her, because most of me was back in Lisbon Falls. I had just come through the rabbit hole. I had just walked along the side of the drying shed and ducked under the chain. I had been prepared to meet the yellow card man, but not to be attacked by him, which I was. Only he was no longer the yellow card man, now he was the orange card man. "You're not supposed to be here," he had said. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And when I'd started to ask him if he'd tried AA for his drinking problem, he'd said, "George?" Now she sounded worried as well as concerned. "What is it? What's wrong?" The fans had totally gotten into the call and response thing. The cheerleaders shouted, "Jim," and the bleacher creatures shouted back, "La." "Fuck off, Jim La!" That was what the yellow card man, who'd become the orange card man, although not yet the dead-by-his-own-hand black card man, had snarled at me. And that was what I was hearing now, tossed back and forth like a medicine ball between the cheerleaders and the 2,500 fans watching them. "Jim La! Jim La! Jim La!" Sadie grabbed my arm and shook me. "Talk to me, mister, talk to me, because I'm getting scared." I turned to her and managed a smile. It did not come easy, believe me. "Just crashing for sugar, I guess. I'm going to grab those Cokes." "You aren't going to faint, are you? I can walk you to the aid station if I'm fine," I said, and then without thinking about what I was doing, I kissed the tip of her nose. Some kid shouted, "Way to go, Mr. A!" Rather than looking irritated, she wriggled her nose like a rabbit, then smiled. "Get out of here, then, before you damage my reputation, and bring me a chili dog. Lots of cheese." "Yes, ma'am." The past harmonizes with itself. That much I already understood. But what song was this? I didn't know, and it worried me plenty. In the concrete runway leading to the refreshment stand, the chant was magnified, making me want to put my hands over my ears to block it out. "Jim La! Jim La! Jim La!"